In the shadowy halls of Ravenwood Manor, a storm brews as Hercule Poirot, the world's greatest detective, arrives at the invitation of Sir Reginald Ashford. A cryptic announcement about a change will spark tension among a cast of suspicious guests: a cunning chemist, a charming financier, a nervous heiress, a secretive scholar, and a calculating lady of the house. When Sir Reginald is found stabbed in a locked study, and a taunting note reads, "Outfoxed at last," Poirot's little gray cells face their ultimate challenge. As murders multiply and secrets unravel, can Poirot outwit a criminal mastermind before the storm claims another victim? Dive into a classic Agatha Christie-style mystery where every clue counts and no one is what they seem. Chapter 1. The Invitation to Ravenwood Manor. The autumn wind howled across the rolling hills of the English countryside, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and the promise of a storm. Hercule Poirot, seated comfortably in his London flat at Whitehaven Mansions, adjusted his perfectly symmetrical bow tie and gazed out the window. His small, fastidious hands folded neatly over a letter that had arrived that morning, its crisp envelope now resting on the polished mahogany table. Before him, the fire in the grate crackled softly, casting a warm glow over the room, which was as orderly as Poirot's own mind, every cushion aligned, every book on the shelf arranged with precision. Captain Arthur Hastings, Poirot's loyal friend and occasional chronicler, lounged in an armchair opposite, a cup of tea balanced precariously on his knee. His face, ever expressive, bore a look of mild curiosity as he watched Poirot reread the letter for the third time. Hastings had known Poirot long enough to recognize the glint in his friend's sharp green eyes, a spark that signaled the stirring of those famous little gray cells. "Really, Poirot," Hastings said, breaking the silence, "you've been staring at that letter as if it holds the secrets of the universe? What's so fascinating about it?" Poirot's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. "Mon ami, it is not the letter itself that fascinates, but the possibilities it suggests. Observe." He lifted the letter with a delicate flourish and handed it to Hastings. "Read, and tell me what you deduce." Hastings took the letter, his brow furrowing as he scanned the elegant handwriting. "My dear Monsieur Poirot, I trust this letter finds you in good health. You are cordially invited to Ravenwood Manor, my estate in Hampshire, for a weekend gathering commencing on the 15th of October. I am hosting a small assembly of distinguished guests, and your presence would be most welcome. There is a matter of some delicacy I wish to discuss, though I shall say no more until we meet. I assure you, the occasion promises to be of interest. Yours sincerely, Sir Reginald Ashford." Hastings looked up, puzzled. "Well, it's a bit vague, isn't it? Sounds like a standard invitation to a country house party, though I suppose the matter of some delicacy is intriguing. Who's this Sir Reginald Ashford, anyway?" Poirot leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Sir Reginald Ashford is a man of considerable wealth and influence, mon ami. An industrialist, made his fortune in chemicals and manufacturing. His company, Ashford Industries, is said to be on the cusp of a great innovation, though what, precisely, remains a mystery. He is not a man to send frivolous invitations." "No, Hastings, this letter, it has the air of something significant. Do you know him personally?" Hastings asked, setting the letter down. "Non, I have not had the pleasure. But I have heard of him, as one hears of all men who shape the world in their quiet way. His wife, Lady Evelyn Ashford, is said to be a woman of great charm and intellect. Their marriage, however, is whispered to be complicated." Poirot's eyes twinkled, and where there is complication, there is often a puzzle for Hercule Poirot to solve. Hastings chuckled. "You're reading an awful lot into a simple invitation, old chap. Perhaps he just wants to show off his manor and his wine cellar." "Perhaps," Poirot said, though his tone suggested he thought otherwise. "But I shall accept the invitation." "And you, mon ami, will accompany me?" "Me?" Hastings blinked. "I wasn't invited." Poirot waved a hand dismissively. "A mere oversight." Sir Reginald will not object to the presence of Captain Hastings, my most trusted confidant. Besides, I require your assistance. Your observations, while not always precise, are invaluable in their sincerity." Hastings grinned, accustomed to Poirot's gentle barbs. "Right. Then, a weekend in the country sounds splendid." "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow morning," Poirot replied, rising with a brisk nod. "We shall take the train to Hampshire. And now, Hastings, I must prepare." The wardrobe of Hercule Poirot must be impeccable, even in the wilds of the English countryside. The following morning, Poirot and Hastings boarded the 9:15 train from Paddington Station, bound for the small village of Ashford Vale. Poirot, dressed in a pristine suit with a gleaming pocket watch, sat ramrod straight, his patent leather shoes reflecting the sunlight streaming through the window. Hastings, more casually attired in tweed, fidgeted with his newspaper, unable to shake the feeling that Poirot's instincts were, as usual, uncannily correct. The journey was pleasant, the train rattling through fields of golden stubble and past hedgerows tinged with autumnal red. Poirot, however, was not one for idle scenery gazing. He spent the trip reviewing a small notebook, jotting down thoughts with a silver fountain pen. Hastings, ever curious, leaned over. "What's that you're writing?" "I'm merely organizing my thoughts," Poirot said, closing the notebook with a snap. "One must always be prepared, Hastings. A detective does not arrive at a mystery unprepared, like a tourist without a map." The train arrived at Ashford Vale by noon, and a sleek black Rolls-Royce awaited them at the station. The driver, a taciturn man with a scar across his cheek, introduced himself as Jenkins, Sir Reginald's chauffeur. As they drove through winding lanes, the landscape grew wilder, the trees denser, until Ravenwood Manor came into view. The manor was a sprawling edifice of grey stone, its turrets and gables rising against a sky now heavy with clouds. Ivy clung to its walls, and the windows gleamed like watchful eyes. The gravel drive crunched under the car's tires as they approached the grand entrance, where a butler stood waiting, his posture as stiff as Poirot's own. "Welcome to Ravenwood Manor, gentlemen," the butler said, his voice smooth but formal. "I am Withers. Sir Reginald is expecting you." Poirot inclined his head. "Merci, Monsieur Withers. We are most pleased to be here." As they stepped into the grand hall, Hastings marveled at the opulence. A crystal chandelier hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting prisms of light across polished oak paneling. A sweeping staircase led to the upper floors, and portraits of stern-faced Ashfords glared down from the walls. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax and old money. Sir Reginald Ashford emerged from a side door, a tall man in his late 50s with a mane of silver hair and a commanding presence. His eyes, sharp and assessing, lingered on Poirot. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, extending a hand. "A pleasure to meet you at last. And this must be Captain Hastings. Welcome to Ravenwood." "The pleasure is mine, Sir Reginald," Poirot replied, shaking his hand. "Your invitation was most intriguing. I am eager to learn more of this delicate matter." Sir Reginald's smile was tight. "All in good time. For now, allow me to introduce you to the other guests. They're gathered in the drawing-room." They followed him through a corridor lined with tapestries, the sound of their footsteps muffled by thick Persian rugs. The drawing-room was a vision of elegance, with heavy velvet curtains and a roaring fire. 5 figures turned to greet them, their expressions ranging from polite curiosity to veiled suspicion. "May I present Lady Evelyn Ashford," Sir Reginald said, gesturing to a striking woman in her 40s. Her auburn hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and her green eyes sparkled with intelligence. She offered a gracious smile, though Poirot noted a flicker of tension in her posture. "Charmed, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice like velvet. "I've heard so much about your remarkable talents, Dr. Clara Thornton," Sir Reginald continued, indicating a woman with sharp features and a no-nonsense air. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, and her glasses glinted in the firelight. "Clara is a brilliant chemist, working on a project of great importance to my company. Dr. Thornton nodded curtly. A pleasure, Monsieur Poirot. I hope your visit is uneventful. Mr. Victor Langston, Sir Reginald said, pointing to a handsome man in his 30s, his tailored suit exuding confidence. Victor's smile was all charm, but his eyes were calculating. Victor is a financier, instrumental in our latest ventures. An honor, Victor said, his handshake firm. I've read about your cases. Quite the mind you have. Miss Beatrice Lyle, Sir Reginald said, introducing a young woman with delicate features and wide, nervous eyes. Her blonde curls framed a face that seemed perpetually on the verge of tears. Beatrice is my ward, soon to come into her inheritance. Beatrice curtsied, her voice soft. How do you do, Monsieur Poirot? And finally, Mr. Harold Grayson, Sir Reginald concluded, gesturing to a thin, bespectacled man in his 50s, who seemed more interested in his book than the newcomers. Harold is a scholar of rare texts, a guest for his expertise in certain matters. Grayson barely looked up. Greetings, he muttered, turning a page. Poirot bowed to each in turn, his mustache twitching as he absorbed their faces, their postures, their voices. Hastings, meanwhile, felt a prickle of unease. The room was too quiet, the smiles. Surveying the board, dinner will be served at 7, Sir Reginald said. Withers will show you to your rooms. I trust you'll find everything to your satisfaction. As they followed Withers upstairs, Hastings whispered, What do you make of them, Poirot? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Each is a piece in a puzzle, Hastings, but the shape of the puzzle, that remains to be seen. Their rooms were on the 2nd floor, overlooking the manor's sprawling gardens. Poirot's was a study in understated luxury, a 4-poster bed, a marble fireplace, and a window with a view of the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Hastings' room, adjacent, was equally grand, though he found the heavy silence of the manor unsettling. As Poirot unpacked his meticulously folded clothes, he hummed a tune, his movements precise. Hastings, he said suddenly, what did you observe about our host? Well, Hastings said, scratching his chin, Sir Reginald seems a bit on edge. That talk of a delicate matter. How do you think he's in some sort of trouble? Perhaps, Poirot said, but it is not only Sir Reginald who is on edge. Did you not notice Lady Evelyn's hands? They trembled, ever so slightly, when she spoke to me, and Dr. Thornton, her curtness hides something. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. Guilt? Hastings frowned. You think one of them is up to no good? Poirot smiled. Mon ami, in a house such as this, with wealth and secrets in abundance, someone is always up to no good. The question is who, and why. They spent the afternoon exploring the manor's public rooms, Poirot noting every detail, the layout of the corridors, the placement of windows, the creak of a particular floor board. Hastings, less attuned to such minutiae, was more interested in the library, a vast room filled with leather-bound volumes and a grand fireplace. He found Grayson there, engrossed in a tome on medieval alchemy. Interesting reading, Mr. Grayson, Hastings asked, attempting conversation. Grayson glanced up, his eyes wary. Merely a hobby. Alchemy is a fascinating blend of science and mystery. Sounds like something Poirot would enjoy, Hastings said. Chuckling, Grayson's lips twitched, but he said nothing more, returning to his book. Hastings wandered back to Poirot, who was examining a portrait of a stern-faced Ashford ancestor. Look at this, Hastings, Poirot said, pointing to the portrait's frame. The dust is uneven. Here, as if the painting has been moved recently. Curious, Nong. Before Hastings could respond, the gong for dinner sounded, echoing through the manor like a call to battle. The dining room was a spectacle of grandeur, its long mahogany table set with silver and crystal. Candles flickered, casting shadows on the paneled walls. Sir Reginald sat at the head, Lady Evelyn at his side, her emerald gown catching the light. The other guests were arranged around the table, their faces a study in contrast. Victor's easy confidence, Clara's guarded expression, Beatrice's nervous fidgeting, Grayson's detached silence. The meal began with a delicate consomme, followed by roasted pheasant and an array of vegetables from the manor's gardens. Conversation flowed, though it was stilted, punctuated by the clink of cutlery and the occasional rumble of thunder outside. Sir Reginald, after a glass of wine, rose to his feet, his expression grave. "My friends," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority, "I have gathered you here for more than mere pleasantries. Tomorrow, I intend to make an announcement that will affect us all. It concerns my will, and certain changes I plan to make." A murmur rippled through the room. Victor's smile faltered. Clara's glasses glinted as she leaned forward, and Beatrice's fork clattered against her plate. Lady Evelyn's face remained serene, but her hand tightened around her wine-glass. "What sort of changes?" Victor asked, his tone light but edged with tension. Sir Reginald's eyes narrowed. "All will be revealed tomorrow. For now, let us enjoy the evening." Poirot, seated beside Hastings, whispered, "Observe, mon ami. The announcement has stirred the waters. Now we shall see what rises to the surface." The rest of the dinner passed in uneasy silence, broken only by polite small talk. Hastings noticed Beatrice glancing repeatedly at Victor, who avoided her gaze. Clara excused herself early, claiming a headache, and Grayson barely spoke, his attention fixed on his plate. As dessert, a rich chocolate souffle was served. The storm broke outside, rain lashing the windows and lightning illuminating the room in stark flashes. The atmosphere grew oppressive, the air thick with unspoken tensions. After dinner, the guests retired to the drawing-room for coffee and brandy. Poirot, ever observant, engaged each guest in turn, his questions seemingly innocuous but designed to probe. He complimented Lady Evelyn on the manor's decor, eliciting a detailed history of its renovations. He asked Clara about her chemical research, noting her reluctance to elaborate. Victor, expansive after a second brandy, boasted about his financial acumen, while Beatrice spoke softly of her love for the gardens. Grayson remained aloof, sipping his coffee in silence. As the clock struck 10, Sir Reginald excused himself, claiming he had papers to review in his study. "I shall see you all at breakfast," he said, his tone formal. "Good night." The guests began to disperse, but Poirot lingered, his eyes scanning the room. "Hastings," he said quietly, "there is a storm within this house as fierce as the one without. I feel it." They retired to their rooms, the manor creaking under the weight of the wind. Hastings, exhausted, fell asleep quickly, lulled by the rhythm of the rain. Poirot, however, sat by his window, his notebook open, his pen moving swiftly, as he recorded his observations. In the dead of night, a scream shattered the silence. Hastings bolted upright, his heart pounding. He stumbled to Poirot's room, finding the detective already dressed, his eyes alert. "Mon Dieu," Poirot said, grabbing his coat. "The game has begun." They hurried downstairs, following the sound to the study. Withers, pale and trembling, stood outside the locked door. "It's Sir Reginald," he stammered. He's dead." Poirot pushed past him, testing the door. It was indeed locked, the key still inside. "Hastings, fetch the others. We must act swiftly." As Hastings roused the guests, Poirot examined the door, his mind racing. The scream, the locked room, the storm. It was all too perfect, too staged. He knew, with the certainty of his little gray cells, that this was no accident. Murder had come to Ravenwood Manor, and Hercule Poirot was ready to meet it. Chapter 2. The shadow of a plinth dining room of Ravenwood Manor glowed with a soft flicker of candle light, casting long shadows across the mahogany table laden with silver and crystal. The storm outside battered the tall windows, the wind, howling like a restless spirit, as if conspiring to heighten the tension within. Hercule Poirot, seated to the right of Sir Reginald Ashford, observed the assembled guests with his characteristic precision, his sharp eyes darting from face to face, cataloguing every gesture, every fleeting expression. Captain Hastings, at his side, fidgeted with his napkin, his discomfort palpable in the heavy air of anticipation. The invitation to this weekend gathering had promised a significant announcement, but the mood at the table suggested something. Far more ominous was a Sir Reginald, a robust man in his late 50s, with a neatly trimmed mustache and a commanding presence, presided over the table with the air of a monarch. His wealth, amassed through shrewd investments in chemical manufacturing, had made him a titan of industry, but his piercing blue eyes betrayed a weariness that wealth could not dispel. To his left sat his wife, Lady Evelyn Ashford, a woman of striking elegance, her auburn hair swept into an intricate chignon, her emerald gown catching the candle light. Her smile was poised, but Poirot noted a certain rigidity in her posture, as if she were bracing herself for an unseen blow. Across from Poirot sat Dr. Clara Thornton, a chemist whose reputation for brilliance was matched only by her aloof demeanor. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, and her sharp features were accentuated by the flicker of the candles, giving her an almost spectral appearance. She spoke little, her attention fixed on her plate, though Poirot caught her stealing glances at Sir Reginald, her eyes narrowing with something akin to calculation. Next to her was Victor Langston, a financier whose charisma was as polished as his tailored suit. His easy smile and quick wit had already won over Beatrice Lyle, the young heiress seated beside him. Beatrice, with her golden curls and wide, innocent eyes, seemed out of place among the more guarded guests, her laughter a bright note in the otherwise somber atmosphere. Yet Poirot detected a nervousness in her, a slight tremor in her hands. As she reached for her wine glass. At the far end of the table sat Harold Grayson, a reclusive scholar, whose unkempt hair and ill-fitting suit marked him as an outsider in this world of wealth and polish. He had barely spoken since their arrival, his attention fixed on a small notebook in which he occasionally scribbled, his lips moving silently as if reciting a private mantra. Poirot found him intriguing, a puzzle within a puzzle, his silence, louder than the chatter of the others. The meal progressed through courses of consomme, roasted pheasant, and delicate soufflés, each dish served with the precision of a military operation by the manor staff. The conversation, however, was anything but orderly. Sir Reginald, after a particularly robust sip of claret, cleared his throat, drawing all ice to him. The room fell silent, save for the distant rumble of thunder. "My dear friends," he began, his voice resonant with authority, "I trust you've enjoyed the hospitality of Ravenwood Manor. I've invited you here not merely for pleasure, though I hope you find it so, but for a matter of some importance." He paused, his gaze sweeping the table, lingering on each guest as if weighing their worth. "Tomorrow evening, I intend to make an announcement regarding my estate. Specifically, I am considering amendments to my will." A ripple of tension passed through the room. Lady Evelyn's smile tightened, her fingers gripping the stem of her wine-glass. Victor Langston's charm faltered, his eyes narrowing as he leaned forward slightly. Beatrice's laughter died in her throat, and she glanced nervously at Victor, as if seeking reassurance. Dr. Thornton's expression remained impassive, but her forward paused mid-air, betraying a flicker of interest. Only Harold Grayson seemed unmoved, his pen scratching softly in his notebook. "Amendments?" Victor asked, his tone light but laced with an edge. "Surely, Sir Reginald, your affairs are in perfect order. Why the need for change?" Sir Reginald's smile was enigmatic, his eyes glinting with something Poirot could not quite place: amusement, perhaps, or defiance. "Let us just say that circumstances have shifted," he replied. "Certain obligations have come to my attention. I wish to ensure that my legacy reflects my true intentions. But fear not, Victor, all will be made clear tomorrow." Poirot's mustache twitched as he absorbed the exchange. Sir Reginald's words were carefully chosen, designed to provoke, to unsettle. The man was no fool, he knew the weight of his announcement, and he was watching his guests as closely as Poirot was. The question was, who among them stood to lose the most? The conversation resumed, but it was strained now, the earlier warmth replaced by a palpable unease. Lady Evelyn steered the discussion toward trivial matters, the weather, the upcoming London season, but her efforts did little to dispel the tension. Poirot, ever the observer, noted the subtle interplay of glances, Victor's fleeting look of concern toward Beatrice, Beatrice's quick glance at the door, Dr. Thornton's measured stare at Sir Reginald, and Grayson's complete detachment, as if he were present in body, but not in spirit. As the meal drew to a close, Sir Reginald rose, raising his glass. To Ravenwood he toasted, and to truths revealed in their proper time. The guests echoed the toast, their voices a discordant chorus, and Poirot felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. Truths, he mused, were often the most dangerous currency. The party dispersed soon after, the guests retiring to their rooms or the drawing-room for brandy and cigars. Poirot, however, lingered in the dining-room, his fingers tracing the edge of his wine-glass as he reviewed the evening's observations. Hastings, ever loyal, remained at his side, his brow furrowed. "Well, Poirot," he said, his voice slow, "what do you make of it? Sir Reginald's announcement had stirred the pot, hasn't it?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Indeed, mon ami, Sir Reginald has cast a stone into still waters, and the ripples reveal much. Did you observe the reactions?" The tightening of Lady Evelyn's lips, the sudden stillness of Mademoiselle Lisle. "And Monsieur Langston, his charm is a mask, but it slipped tonight." Hastings frowned. "You think one of them is up to something?" "I think," Poirot said, his voice soft but firm, "that each of them has a secret, and Sir Reginald knows it. He plays a dangerous game, Hastings, and I fear the consequences may be grave." The two men made their way to the drawing-room, where Victor and Beatrice were engaged in a quiet conversation by the fireplace. Lady Evelyn sat at a card table, shuffling a deck with practiced ease, while Dr. Thornton stood by a window, staring out into the storm. Grayson was nowhere to be seen, likely retreated to his books. The atmosphere was heavy, the air thick with unspoken questions. Poirot declined a brandy and instead wandered the room, his keen eyes taking in every detail, the ornate tapestries, depicting hunting scenes, the heavy oak paneling, the portraits of Ashford ancestors gazing down with stern disapproval. He paused by a bookshelf, running his fingers along the spines, when a faint creak caught his attention. The sound came from the direction of the hallway, barely audible over the storm. He glanced at Hastings, who had not noticed, and decided to investigate later. As the evening wore on, the guests began to retire, their farewells polite but strained. Poirot and Hastings were shown to their rooms by a taciturn butler, who moved with the silent efficiency of a shadow. Poirot's room was a study in opulence, with a four-poster bed draped in crimson velvet and a fireplace crackling warmly. Yet, he felt no comfort, his mind occupied with the puzzle of Ravenwood Manor. "Sleep well, Hastings," he said as they parted in the corridor. "But keep your ears open. The night, I think, has more to tell us." Hastings nodded, though his expression suggested he found Poirot's cryptic warning less than reassuring. Alone in his room, Poirot sat at a small writing desk, his notebook open before him. He began to jot down his observations, his neat handwriting filling the page with names, motives, and questions. Sir Reginald's announcement was the key, he was certain, but to what lock? A will was a powerful thing, capable of igniting greed, fear, or desperation, but whose desperation was greatest? He was about to retire when a piercing scream shattered the silence of the manor. It was a sound of pure terror, raw and unfiltered, echoing through the stone corridors. Poirot was on his feet in an instant, his cane in hand, moving with the speed that belied his fastidious appearance. Hastings burst into the corridor, his dressing gown hastily tied, his face pale. "Good Lord! Poirot, what was that? Come, Hastings!" Poirot barked, already striding toward the source of the scream. "There is no time to waste." They followed the sound to the west wing, where a cluster of guests and servants had gathered outside a heavy oak door. Lady Evelyn stood at the forefront, her face ashen, her hands trembling. Beatrice clung to Victor, her eyes wide with fear, while Dr. Thornton hovered at the edge of the group, her expression unreadable. The butler, his composure shaken, was attempting to force the door open. "It's Sir Reginald's study," Lady Evelyn whispered, her voice barely audible. The scream came from there. The butler stepped aside as Poirot approached, his small frame radiating authority. He examined the door, noting the sturdy lock and the absence of any signs of tampering. "Monsieur," he said to the butler, "do you have the key?" The butler nodded, producing a ring of keys and unlocking the door with a trembling hand. The door swung open, revealing a scene that froze the blood of even the most hardened among them. Sir Reginald Ashford lay slumped over his desk, a letter opener protruding from his chest, a pool of blood spreading across the polished wood. His eyes were open, staring blankly into eternity, and in his hand was a crumpled piece of paper. Poirot stepped forward, his gaze sweeping the room. The windows were locked, the curtains undisturbed. The fire in the grate had burned low, casting eerie shadows across the walls. The other guests crowded at the doorway, their gasps and murmurs filling the air. But Poirot raised a hand for silence. "Do not touch anything," he commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. "This is no accident, Ms. Amos. This is murder." Hastings, standing at his side, looked ill. "Murder." "But Poirot, the door was locked from the inside. How could anyone—" "Patience, Hastings," Poirot interrupted, his eyes fixed on the body. "The how is always revealed by the why, and the why, I suspect, lies in the hearts of those gathered here tonight." He bent down, carefully examining the paper in Sir Reginald's hand. It was a single sheet, torn at the edges, with 3 words scrawled in a hurried hand: "Outfoxed at last." Poirot's mustache twitched as he read the words, his mind racing. The note was a challenge, a taunt directed at someone, perhaps at him. But who was the fox, and who the hunter? As the storm raged outside, Poirot straightened, his gaze sweeping the faces of the guests. Each one, he knew, held a piece of the puzzle, the shadow of a plan had. Chapter 3. The locked room puzzle there in Ravenwood Manor was thick with tension as the scream still seemed to echo through its grand halls. Hercule Poirot, his mustache impeccably groomed despite the late hour, stood at the threshold of Sir Reginald Ashford's study, his keen eyes surveying the scene before him. The room, lit by a single flickering chandelier, was a study in opulence and chaos. Sir Reginald lay slumped over his mahogany desk, a letter opener protruding from his chest, the blood pooling darkly on the polished wood. The windows were shut tight, their heavy bolts unyielding, and the door, now ajar only because Captain Hastings had broken it down, had been locked from the inside. A single sheet of paper, clutched in Sir Reginald's lifeless hand, bore the cryptic words, "Outfoxed at last." Captain Hastings, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly, stood beside Poirot, his usual composure shaken. "Good heavens, Poirot," he whispered, "how could this happen? The door was locked, the windows barred. It's as if the murderer vanished into thin air." Poirot's eyes gleamed with that peculiar intensity that Hastings had come to recognize as the spark of his formidable intellect at work. "Vanished, you say, mon ami? Non, non. The murderer has not vanished. He or she is still among us, hiding behind a veil of cleverness. But fear not, Hastings, the little gray cells, they are already stirring. The local police, led by the familiar figure of Inspector Japp, arrived shortly after, their boots clomping heavily on the manor's marble floors. Japp, a man of practical instincts but limited imagination, surveyed the scene with a furrowed brow. "Looks like a clear case of suicide to me," he declared, adjusting his hat. "Man locks himself in, writes a note, and does himself in with the letter opener. No fuss, no mystery." Poirot's lips twitched into a faint, almost pitying smile. "Suicide, Inspector. Non, this is no suicide. This is murder, most meticulously planned." The locked room, The absence of fingerprints, the cryptic note, these are not the acts of a man ending his own life. They are the flourishes of a criminal mind, one that seeks to outwit us all. Japp raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. No fingerprints on the weapon. Poirot, the door was locked from the inside, and the windows haven't been touched. You're telling me someone got in here, stabbed Sir Reginald, and then locked the door behind them without leaving a trace? Preposterous, preposterous, perhaps. To the untrained eye, Poirot replied, his tone calm but firm. But to Hercule Poirot, it is merely a puzzle, one that demands the application of order and method. Let us begin. Poirot knelt beside the body, his movements precise and deliberate. He examined the letter opener, its silver handle gleaming faintly in the candle light. Observe, Hastings, he said, pointing to the weapon. The blade is embedded deeply, with force and precision. A man in the throes of despair does not strike himself so cleanly. And the note outfoxed that lasted is too theatrical, too deliberate. It is a message, not to Sir Reginald, but to us. Hastings frowned, his mind struggling to keep pace. A message, but from whom? And how did they get in and out of this room? Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he moved to the windows, running his fingers along the frames, testing the bolts. They were solid, rusted slightly from disuse, and showed no signs of tampering. He turned to the door, its heavy oak frame splintered where Hastings had forced it open. The key, still in the lock, was turned inward, confirming that the door had, indeed, been secured from within. Curious, Poirot murmured, his eyes narrowing. The key is in place, yet the murderer has left no trace. This is not a matter of brute force, Hastings. This is a matter of finesse. Inspector Japp, growing impatient, crossed his arms. Finesse or not, Poirot, I've got a mannerful of guests to question and a coroner waiting to take the body. If you've got a theory, let's hear it. Poirot raised a hand, silencing Japp with a gesture that was both polite and commanding. Patience, Inspector. First, we must establish the alibis of our guests. Each one, I suspect, will have a story to tell, and in those stories, we shall find the threads of truth and deception. The guests were gathered in the drawing room, their faces a mix of shock, fear, and suspicion. Lady Evelyn Ashford, Sir Reginald's widow, sat rigidly on a velvet chaise, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her pale blue eyes were red-rimmed, but her composure was impeccable, betraying no hint of collapse. Dr. Clara Thornton, the chemist, stood near the fireplace, her sharp features illuminated by the flickering flames. She seemed detached, her gaze fixed on some distant point, as if her mind were elsewhere. Victor Langston, the financier, paced restlessly, his charming smile replaced by a nervous tic. Beatrice Lyle, the young heiress, sat huddled in an armchair, her delicate frame trembling slightly, while Harold Grayson, the scholar, stood apart, his expression unreadable behind his thick spectacles. Poirot began his questioning with Lady Evelyn, his tone gentle but probing. Madame, you were the last to see Sir Reginald alive, were you not? During dinner, he spoke of his will, and then retired to his study. Did you notice anything unusual in his demeanor? Lady Evelyn's lips tightened briefly before she answered. Reginald was preoccupied, Monsieur Poirot. He had been for days. This business with the will, it weighed heavily on him. But he said nothing to me of danger, if that's what you're asking. Poirot nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. And your whereabouts, madame, after dinner? I retired to my room, she said quickly. I was exhausted. The storm, you see, it gives me migraines. I heard nothing until the scream. Poirot turned to Dr. Thornton, who met his gaze with a cool, almost defiant stare. Mademoiselle Thornton, you are a woman of science. Non, a chemist of great renown. Were you, perhaps, working on something for Sir Reginald? Something that might have caused tension? Dr. Thornton's eyes flickered, but her voice remained steady. I was in my room, Monsieur Poirot, reviewing my notes. Sir Reginald and I were collaborating on a project. Yes, but it was purely professional. I heard the scream from upstairs and came down to find this. Victor Langston, unable to contain himself, interjected. Look here, Poirot, this is all nonsense. I was in the billiard room, smoking a cigar, when I heard the scream. I've got no reason to kill Reginald. He was my friend, my business partner. Poirot raised an eyebrow. A friend, Monsieur Langston. Yet Sir Reginald spoke of amending his will, and you seemed displeased. Perhaps there was a financial matter at stake. Victor's face flushed, but he waved a hand dismissively. Business is business, Poirot. We had our disagreements, but murder. Absurd. Beatrice Lyle, her voice barely above a whisper, spoke next. I was in my room, Monsieur Poirot. I didn't hear anything until the scream. I swear it. Harold Grayson, when questioned, offered a curt response. I was in the library, reading. I heard the scream and came at once. That's all. Poirot studied each guest in turn, his mind cataloguing their words, their gestures, their hesitations. Each of you, he said slowly, has an alibi. Each of you was alone, or so you claim. Yet one of you, or perhaps more than one, is lying. The truth, mes amis, it is like a diamond hidden in the sand. It requires patience to uncover. Hastings, standing at Poirot's side, leaned in and whispered, They all seem so certain, Poirot, but how could anyone have done it? The room was locked. Poirot's eyes twinkled. The locked room, Hastings, is not the mystery you think it is. It is a distraction, a sleight of hand. The true question is not how the murderer entered and left, but why they wished us to believe it was impossible. Over the next hours, Poirot conducted a meticulous examination of the study. He measured the distance from the desk to the door, noting the position of every object. The chandelier, he observed, was slightly askew, as if it had been disturbed. A faint scratch on the floor near the bookshelf caught his eye, but he said nothing, merely filing it away in his mind. The cryptic note, outfoxed at last, he examined, with particular care, noting the elegant handwriting and the ink, which was still slightly damp. Curious, he murmured to himself. The note was written recently, perhaps moments before the murder. Yet Sir Reginald did not write it. His hands were stained with blood, not ink. Inspector Japp, growing increasingly exasperated, interrupted. Look, Poirot, I've got men searching the grounds, but there's no sign of an intruder. The storm's washed away any tracks. If you're so sure it's murder, give me something to work with. Poirot turned to Japp, his expression serene. Something to work with, Inspector. Very well. Consider this. The letter opener was wiped, clean of fingerprints, yet Sir Reginald's hands are unmarked by the effort of cleaning it. The note, it is written in a hand that does not match his. And the locked room, it is not so locked as you think. There is always a way, Inspector, for a mind determined to find it. Japp sighed heavily. You and your riddles, Poirot. I'll question the staff, see if they saw anything. But mark my words, this'll turn out to be simpler than you're making it. Poirot smiled faintly. Simplicity, Inspector, is the refuge of the unimaginative. This crime, it is a tapestry woven with care. We must unravel it thread by thread. As Japp and his men dispersed to question the servants, Poirot returned to the study, his mind racing. He stood at the center of the room, closing his eyes, letting the scene replay in his imagination. The scream, the locked door, the note, the letter opener, each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture they formed was still obscured. He thought of the guests, their alibis so neatly aligned, their motives hidden beneath layers of politeness and deceit. Lady Evelyn's composure, Dr. Thornton's evasiveness, Victor's agitation, Beatrice's fear, Grayson's silence, each was a clue in itself. Hastings, Poirot said suddenly, opening his eyes, there is something in this room that does not belong, something that the murderer left behind, perhaps by accident. We must find it, Hastings, ever eager to assist, began searching the room with renewed vigor. He checked under the desk, behind the curtains, even inside the drawers, but found nothing out of place. Poirot, meanwhile, moved to the bookshelf, running his fingers along the spines of the books. One volume, a heavy tome on medieval architecture, seemed slightly out of alignment. He pulled it gently, and to his surprise, it tilted forward, revealing a faint click. A panel in the wall shifted slightly, but did not open. Mon Dieu, Poirot breathed, his eyes alight with discovery. A secret, Hastings. This room, it holds more than it seems. Before he could investigate further, a commotion from the drawing room interrupted his thoughts. One of Japp's men had found something, a small vial of liquid, tucked into a vase in the hallway outside the study. Poirot took the vial, holding it up to the light. It was unmarked, but its contents shimmered faintly, suggesting something far from ordinary. Perhaps, Poirot said softly, this is the key to our puzzle. Or perhaps it is another distraction. We shall see. As the night wore on, the storm outside grew fiercer, its thunder rattling the manor's ancient walls. Poirot, undeterred, continued his work, his mind a whirlwind of deduction and intuition. The locked room, the note, the vial, the guest's each was a thread in the tapestry of the crime, and Poirot was determined to weave them together. The murderer, he knew, was watching, waiting, believing they had outfoxed him. But Hercule Poirot was not so easily defeated. His little gray cells, as always, were his greatest weapon, and he would use them to uncover the truth, no matter how deeply it was hidden. The hours stretched on, and Poirot's investigation grew more intense. He questioned the servants, each of whom claimed to have been in the kitchens or their quarters at the time of the scream. The butler, a stoic man named Jenkins, confirmed that the study door was locked when he tried to enter after hearing the scream. The maid, a nervous girl named Molly, admitted to seeing Dr. Thornton in the hallway earlier that evening, carrying a small case that she assumed contained scientific instruments. Poirot filed this away, noting the discrepancy with Thornton's claim of being in her room all night. He returned to the study, examining the desk once more. A faint smudge of ink on the blotter caught his eye, barely visible in the dim light. He took a magnifying glass from his pocket and studied it closely. The smudge was not random, it formed the shape of a partial fingerprint, too faint to identify, but enough to confirm his suspicion that the note had been written in haste, perhaps under duress. Hastings, he said, consider the psychology of our murderer. They wish us to believe this is an impossible crime, yet they leave clues subtle? Yes, but clues nonetheless. The note, the vial, the smudge, they are breadcrumbs, leading us to the truth. Hastings shook his head, bewildered. But why leave clues at all, Poirot? If they're so clever, why not cover their tracks completely? Poirot's smile was almost mischievous. Because, mon ami, the cleverest criminals cannot resist the temptation to boast. They wish to be admired, even as they hide. This note outfoxed. At last it is not merely a taunt, it is a challenge, issued directly to Hercule Poirot. The night deepened, and the manor seemed to close in around them, its shadows growing longer, its silence more oppressive. Poirot, however, was undaunted. He moved through the study with the precision of a surgeon, his mind cutting through the layers of deception. The locked room was no longer a mystery but a question, and Poirot was determined to find the answer. He thought of the guests, their alibis, their motives. Lady Evelyn's wealth, Dr. Thornton's formula, Victor's debts, Beatrice's inheritance. Grayson's knowledge, each was a piece of the puzzle, but the key, he knew, lay in the room itself. He returned to the bookshelf, pressing gently on the panel. This time it gave way, revealing a narrow space behind it, too small for a person, but large enough for something to be hidden. Inside, he found a single object, a small brass key, its surface polished and gleaming. It was not the key to the study door, but something else, something that Poirot suspected held the secret to the crime. Voila, he said softly, holding the key up to the light. The first thread is pulled. Hastings, now, we must follow it to the end. As the storm raged outside, Poirot's mind was calm, focused, relentless. The locked room puzzle was beginning to unravel, and with it, the identity of the murderer. But he knew the game was far from over. The killer was among them, watching, waiting, believing they had outsmarted the great Hercule Poirot. But Poirot was not so easily outfoxed. With his little gray cells and his unyielding determination, he would uncover the truth, no matter how cleverly it was concealed. The investigation continued into the early hours, with Poirot questioning each guest, again probing for inconsistencies. Lady Evelyn's story remained unchanged, but her hands trembled slightly when Poirot mentioned the will. Dr. Thornton's composure faltered when he asked about the vial, her eyes darting to the side as if seeking an escape. Victor's bluster grew more defensive, his charm wearing thin under Poirot's relentless scrutiny. Beatrice, tearful and fragile, seemed on the verge of confessing something, but she held back, her fear palpable. Grayson, silent and withdrawn, offered little, but his nervous glances betrayed a deeper unease. Poirot returned to the study once more, determined to uncover every secret it held. He examined the chandelier again, noting its slight tilt. Climbing onto a chair, he inspected it closely, finding a faint trace of wax on the chain, as if a candle had been placed there briefly. The wax was fresh, suggesting it had been used that night, perhaps to light the murderer's way in the dark. Hastings, Poirot said, his voice low, the murderer was here, in this room, after the lights were extinguished. They needed light to write the note, to stage the scene. This wax it is another clue, another thread. Hastings, exhausted but fascinated, nodded. But who, Poirot, who could have done this? Poirot's eyes gleamed. That, mon ami, is what we shall discover. The locked room is not the end of the mystery, but the beginning. The murderer believes they have outfoxed us, but they have underestimated Hercule Poirot. The little gray cells, they do not fail. As dawn broke over Ravenwood Manor, the storm began to subside, its fury giving way to a pale, watery light. Poirot stood at the window, the brass key in his hand, his mind racing. The locked room puzzle was far from solved, but he was closer now, closer to the truth. The murderer was among them, and Poirot would find them. The game, as the note had declared, was about outfoxing, but it was Poirot who would have the final move. Chapter 4. The chemist's secret storm outside Ravenwood Manor had grown fiercer, its howling winds rattling the ancient windows as if the house itself were protesting the grim events unfolding within. The dining room, where only hours ago the guests had sat in uneasy civility, now felt like a stage abandoned mid-performance, the air heavy with suspicion. Hercule Poirot, his small frame impeccable in his tailored suit, sat in a high-backed chair near the fireplace, his sharp eyes scanning the room. Captain Hastings, ever the loyal companion, hovered nearby, his brow furrowed with the weight of the locked room mystery that had gripped them all since Sir Reginald's body was discovered. The local police, under Inspector Japp's brusque command, had cordoned off the study, but their initial verdict of suicide glared against Poirot's instincts. The cryptic note, outfoxed at last, clutched in Sir Reginald's lifeless hand, was no suicide note. It was a challenge, a taunt from a mind that believed itself untouchable. Poirot's little gray cells were already weaving through the tangle of clues, and his first task was to unravel the secrets of the guests, starting with the enigmatic Dr. Clara Thornton. Dr. Thornton sat across from Poirot in the Manor's library, a grand room lined with leather-bound volumes and heavy oak shelves that seemed to lean inward, as if guarding their secrets. The firelight cast flickering shadows across her face, accentuating the sharp angles of her cheekbones and the cool, analytical glint in her eyes. She was a woman in her late 30s, her dark hair pulled back severely, her posture rigid yet composed, as if she were accustomed to being scrutinized. Her reputation, a brilliant chemist, preceded her, and Poirot had already noted the way her fingers, long and precise, fidgeted slightly when Sir Reginald's death was mentioned at dinner. Mademoiselle Thornton, Poirot began, his voice smooth and deliberate. You are, I understand, a woman of considerable intellect, a scientist whose work with Sir Reginald was of great importance. Perhaps you will enlighten me as to the nature of this work. Clara's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, her eyes darted to the side, as if searching for an escape in the rows of books. It's no secret, Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice measured. I was developing a new chemical compound for Sir Reginald's company, a formula that could revolutionize industrial processes. It was highly confidential, of course, but nothing that would warrant this tragedy. Poirot tilted his head, his mustache twitching slightly as he studied her. Confidential, you say, and yet, Sir Reginald, he speaks of this work at dinner. Non. He hints at its value, at its potential to change fortunes. This does not strike you as unusual for a project so secret. Clara's fingers stilled, and she met his gaze with a flicker of defiance. Sir Reginald was proud of the company's advancements. He was not always discreet, especially when he'd had a glass of port. I advised him to keep the details private, but he was a man who enjoyed his theatrics. Indeed, Poirot murmured, his eyes narrowing. And where were you, mademoiselle, when this tragedy occurred? The scream, it was heard at approximately midnight, was it not? I was in my room, she replied without hesitation. I'd retired early to review some notes. Scientific work doesn't pause for social gatherings. Monsieur Poirot. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. And you heard nothing? No footsteps, no voices, before the scream? Nothing unusual, she said, her tone firm. The storm was loud, and these old walls muffle sound. I was focused on my work. Hastings, standing by the window, shifted uncomfortably. He'd always found Poirot's interrogations fascinating, but there was something about Dr. Thornton's cool demeanor that unnerved him. She was too composed, too precise, like a formula carefully balanced to avoid error. He glanced at Poirot, hoping for a sign that his friend was unraveling her, but Poirot's face remained a mask of polite curiosity. Merci, mademoiselle, Poirot said, rising with a small bow. For now, that is all, but I may have further questions. The mind, it is like a laboratory. Non. It requires time to distill the truth. Clara stood, smoothing her skirt with a practiced motion. Of course, Monsieur Poirot, I'm at your disposal. She hesitated, then added, I hope you find whoever did this. Sir Reginald was a complicated man, but he didn't deserve this. As she left the room, her footsteps echoing on the polished floor, Hastings leaned toward Poirot. What do you make of her, Poirot? She's awfully calm for someone whose employer was just murdered. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Calm, mon ami, is often the mask of calculation. Dr. Thornton, she is a scientist, accustomed to precision and control. But her eyes, they betray a flicker of unease. There is something she does not wish us to know. We must discover what it is. The investigation took a new turn later, that morning when Inspector Japp, his face red from the cold, summoned Poirot to the guest wing. A maid, flustered and wide-eyed, had discovered something in Dr. Thornton's room during her routine cleaning. Japp led Poirot and Hastings to a small, neatly arranged bedroom where a leather satchel sat open on a writing desk. Inside, nestled among papers and a few personal items, was a small glass vial filled with a colorless liquid. Japp held it up, his expression grim. Found this tucked in a side pocket. The maid swears it wasn't there yesterday when she tittied up. What do you make of it, Poirot? Poirot took the vial, holding it to the light with a delicate touch, as if it were a rare artifact. Curio, he murmured, a chemist with a vial of unknown substance, hidden in her bag. This is not the behavior of one who has nothing to conceal. Hastings peered over his shoulder. Could it be poison? Poirot. Something to do with Sir Reginald's death. Perhaps, mon ami. Perhaps, Poirot said, slipping the vial into a handkerchief and pocketing it. But we must not leap to conclusions. The mind, it must remain clear. Like the glass of this vial, we will have it analyzed. For now, let us observe Dr. Thornton more closely. The day wore on, with the manor's atmosphere growing heavier, as if the storm outside were pressing against the walls. Poirot, ever methodical, continued his interviews, but his thoughts kept returning to Clara Thornton. Her expertise in chemistry made her a figure of interest, particularly given the pristine condition of the letter opener that had killed Sir Reginald. No fingerprints, no traces of blood beyond the blade's tip. It was as if the weapon had been wiped clean with scientific precision. Meanwhile, Hastings found himself drawn to the drawing room where the other guests had gathered, their faces pale and drawn. Beatrice Lyle, the young heiress, sat by the window, her delicate hands twisting a handkerchief. Victor Langston, the financier, paced near the fireplace, his charm replaced by a nervous energy. Lady Evelyn, Sir Reginald's widow, sat in a high back chair, her grief cloaked in stoic dignity. Only Harold Grayson, the scholar, was absent, reportedly sequestered in the library with his books. Hastings, ever eager to contribute, decided to keep an ear open for any stray remarks. As he lingered near the tea tray, pretending to study a painting, he caught a snatch of conversation between Beatrice and Victor. Their voices were low, urgent, and Hastings strained to hear. "Owe him more than you think," Beatrice whispered, her eyes darting toward the door. "If he finds out, Victor, we're finished." Victor's jaw tightened. "Keep your voice down, Beatrice. No one knows about the debt, and no one will, as long as you hold your nerve." Hastings's heart raced. A debt? Could it be connected to Sir Reginald's murder? He made a mental note to share this with Poirot, but before he could slip away, Lady Evelyn's voice cut through the room. "Captain Hastings," she said, her tone polite but edged with steel, "is there something particularly fascinating about that painting, or are you simply avoiding conversation?" Hastings flushed, caught off guard. "Oh, just admiring the brushwork, Lady Evelyn," he stammered. "Quite a striking piece." She raised an eyebrow, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Indeed, Ravenwood is full of surprises, Captain. You do well to keep your eyes on more than just the artwork." The warning, subtle but unmistakable, sent a chill down Hastings's spine. He excused himself and hurried to find Poirot, who was in the conservatory, examining a row of potted plants with an intensity that seemed absurd given the circumstances. "Poirot," Hastings said, breathless, "I overheard something Beatrice and Victor talking about a debt. It sounded serious, like they're hiding something from the others." Poirot's eyes lit up, and he straightened, brushing a speck of dust from his sleeve. "Bon, mon ami. This is most interesting. A debt, you say, between the heiress and the financier, and yet it is Dr. Thornton who occupies my thoughts. Tell me, Hastings, did you notice anything unusual about her at dinner last night?" Hastings frowned, trying to recall. She was quiet, mostly, kept to herself, didn't join in tea. He banner, but she was watching everyone, like she was sizing them up. "Precisement," Poirot said, tapping his temple. "She observes, she calculates, but what is it that she seeks to protect? Or to hide? We must learn more about this formula of hers, and this violet may hold the key." The afternoon brought a new development. Poirot, with Japp's reluctant permission, sent the vial to a nearby laboratory for analysis, though the storm delayed any immediate results. In the meantime, he requested a private meeting with Dr. Thornton in the manor's small parlor, a room adorned with faded tapestries and a ticking grandfather clock that seemed to count down to some inevitable revelation. Clara entered, her expression guarded but not hostile. "You wish to see me again, Monsieur Poirot," she said, taking a seat. "Oui, mademoiselle," Poirot replied, his tone genial but firm. "There is a matter of some delicacy. A vial was found in your satchela. Most curious discovery. Nong. Perhaps you can explain its purpose. Clara's face paled slightly, but she recovered quickly. A vial. I carry many samples in my work. It's likely a reagent, something for my experiments. I need to see it to be certain. Poirot produced the vial, still wrapped in his handkerchief, and held it up. This, mademoiselle, it was hidden, not among your scientific papers, but in a concealed pocket. This suggests intent. Clara's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, a crack appeared in her composure. I don't appreciate the insinuation, Monsieur Poirot. My work requires discretion, and I often carry sensitive materials. That vial could be anything: a stabilizer, a catalyst. I need to test it to know. And yet, Poirot said, leaning forward, you did not mention this vial when we spoke earlier. A scientist of your precision, mademoiselle, does not forget such things? Why, then, the omission? Clara hesitated, her fingers tightening on the armrest. I may have overlooked it. The events of last night have been distressing. I wasn't thinking clearly. Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign Hastings recognized as skepticism. Distressing, oui. But the mind of a scientist, it is trained to remain clear, even in chaos. Tell me, mademoiselle, this formula you worked on for Sir Reginald, what was its purpose? And who else knew of it? Clara's gaze hardened. It was a proprietary compound, meant to enhance industrial efficiency. Sir Reginald was the primary investor, and Victor Langston facilitated the financial arrangements. Beyond that, I shared nothing. My work is my own. Victor Langston, Poirot repeated, his voice soft but probing. A man with debts, perhaps. A man who might see your formula as a means to an end. Clara stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I don't know what you're implying, Monsieur Poirot, but I won't be accused of something I didn't do. If you have evidence, present it. Otherwise, I have nothing more to say. She swept out of the room, leaving Poirot and Hastings in silence. The grandfather clock ticked louder, as if marking the passage of a critical moment. She's hiding something, Hastings said, unable to contain himself. That vial, her evasiveness, it's all too suspicious. Poirot, oui, mon ami, Poirot said, rising and adjusting his cuffs. But suspicion is not proof, Dr. Thornton. She is a piece of the puzzle, but not the whole picture. We must consider the others: Victor, with his debts, Beatrice, with her secrets, and Lady Evelyn, whose grief may mask a deeper motive. And then there is the note, outfoxed at last. It is a challenge, Hastings, and Hercule Poirot does not refuse a challenge. As the day drew to a close, the storm outside showed no sign of abating, and the manor felt more like a prison than a refuge. Poirot retired to his room, his mind a whirl of possibilities, while Hastings, restless and uneasy, wandered the halls, unable to shake the feeling that the killer was watching, waiting for their next move. The vial, the formula, the debt, they were threads in a tapestry of deception, and Poirot knew that unraveling one would lead to the others. But for now, the chemist's secret remained just that, a secret, locked away in the mind of a woman who was as brilliant as she was enigmatic. The night stretched on, and in the darkness of Ravenwood Manor, the truth lay hidden, waiting for Poirot's little gray cells to bring it to light. Chapter 5. The financier's gambit. Morning after Sir Reginald Ashford's murder cast a pall over Ravenwood Manor, its grand halls now steeped in suspicion. The storm that had raged through the night had settled into a dreary drizzle, cloaking the estate in a gray mist that seemed to mirror the unease among its inhabitants. Hercule Poirot, immaculate as ever in his tailored suit and polished shoes, stood by a window in the drawing-room, his sharp eyes scanning the rain-soaked gardens. Beyond, his hands, clasped behind his back, betrayed no agitation, but his mind was a whirl of observation and deduction. Captain Hastings, ever the loyal companion, hovered nearby, his brow furrowed as he tried to make sense of the previous night's horrors. Poirot, Hastings began, his voice low, this locked room business, it's utterly baffling. A man, stabbed, doors and windows bolted. No trace of the killer. It's like something out of a novel. Poirot turned, his mustache twitching slightly as the faint smile played on his lips. Mon ami, life is often more fantastical than any novel. The impossible is merely a puzzle waiting for the correct arrangement of pieces. And, in this case, the pieces are the people within these walls. Hastings nodded, though his expression remained dubious. But where do we even start? Everyone claims they were elsewhere, and yet someone must have slipped into that study. Precisement, Poirot replied, his voice crisp. And that is why we turn our attention to motive. Who stood to gain from Sir Reginald's death? Who was desperate enough to commit such a crime? Let us begin with Monsieur Victor Langston, the financier with the charming smile and, I suspect, the heavy debts. Victor Langston, the charismatic financier who had been among the guests at dinner, had caught Poirot's attention from the moment they arrived. His polished demeanor, quick wit, and easy laughter had a practiced air, as though he were performing for an audience. Yet, beneath the charm, Poirot had noted a flicker of unease whenever Sir Reginald spoke of his business affairs. The announcement about the will had visibly shaken Victor, his knuckles whitening around his wine glass. Poirot's little grey cells had already marked him as a man with secrets. The drawing-room, where Poirot and Hastings now stood, was a grand space filled with heavy oak furniture, gilded portraits, and a massive fireplace that crackled softly. The other guests were scattered about the manor, some in their rooms, others lingering in the dining hall, all under the watchful eye of Inspector Japp's men. Poirot had requested a private interview with Victor, and as the clock struck 10, the financier entered, his usual swagger tempered by a wary glance. "Good morning, Monsieur Langston," Poirot greeted, gesturing to a plush armchair. "I trust you slept well, despite the unfortunate events." Victor sat, crossing one leg over the other with deliberate nonchalance. "As well as one can in a house where murder's been done. Mr. Poirot, a ghastly business, isn't it?" His voice was smooth, but his fingers drummed lightly on the armrest, betraying a nervous energy. "Ghastly, indeed," Poirot agreed, his eyes fixed on Victor's, "and most curious, this locked room. But let us speak plainly. Monsieur, you were not entirely at ease last night when Sir Reginald spoke of his will. Perhaps you would care to explain why." Victor's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. "I don't know what you mean, sir. Reginald was a friend and a business associate. His death is a shock to me, as it is to everyone." Poirot tilted his head, his gaze unrelenting. "A friend, you say? Yet, I have heard rumors, perhaps that your financial dealings with Sir Reginald were not entirely harmonious. There is talk of loans, of debts unpaid. Is this not so?" Victor's jaw tightened, and for a moment, he seemed to weigh his options. Then, with a sigh, he leaned back in his chair. "All right, Poirot, you've done your homework." "Yes. I borrowed money from Sir Reginald. Quite a bit. If I'm honest, the market's been unkind, and my investments haven't panned out as I'd hoped. But I was working on repaying him every penny. Working on it," Poirot repeated, his tone neutral. "And yet, Sir Reginald, he was not a patient man, was he? I understand he was pressing you for repayment, perhaps threatening to expose your difficulties. Such a thing could ruin a man like you, non?" Victor's eyes narrowed, and his voice took on an edge. "What are you implying, Poirot? That I'd kill a man over a few pounds? I'm no murderer. Besides, I was in my room when it happened to ask anyone." Poirot nodded, as if satisfied, but his mind was far from settled. "Of course, monsieur, your alibi is noted, but tell me, what did you make of Sir Reginald's announcement last night? This talk of changing his will, did it concern you?" Victor hesitated, his fingers stilling on the armrest. "It was unexpected," he admitted. "Reginald was always full of surprises, but I didn't think he'd pull something like that. I suppose it ruffled a few feathers, didn't it?" "Not just mine, indeed," Poirot said, his voice soft but probing. "And whose feathers?" "Do," you think, were most ruffled? Victor shrugged, his nonchalance returning. Take your pick. Beatrice was his ward. She'd have a lot to lose if he cut her out. Clara, that chemist, was tied up in his business dealings, too. Even Evelyn Lady Ashford looked like she'd seen a ghost when he mentioned the will. You're the detective, Poirot, you tell me. Poirot smiled faintly, his eyes gleaming with that peculiar intensity that Hastings knew meant he was onto something. Merci, Monsieur Langston, you have been most illuminating. For now, that will be all. As Victor rose and left the room, Hastings turned to Poirot, his voice eager. Well, what do you think? He's hiding something, isn't he? Poirot's smile widened. Oh, mon ami, he is hiding many things, but whether those things include murder, that is the question. Come, let us examine the study once more. There is a clue there, I am certain, that will shed light on Monsieur Langston's secrets. The study where Sir Reginald had met his end was a somber place, its heavy curtains drawn against the grey morning light. The desk, where the body had been found, was still cordoned off by Japp's men, though the body itself had been removed. Poirot moved with purpose, his small frame darting from one corner of the room to another, his eyes scanning every detail. Hastings followed, trying to keep up with his friend's rapid deductions. Poirot, what are we looking for? Hastings asked, watching as Poirot knelt by the fireplace, peering into the ashes. Something that does not belong, Poirot murmured. Something that was meant to be destroyed, but was not entirely consumed. He reached into the fireplace, his gloved hand sifting through the ash, and pulled out a small, charred fragment of paper. It was a piece of a ledger, its edges singed but still legible. Numbers and names danced across the fragment, and among them, Poirot's sharp eyes caught the name Langston. Aha! Poirot exclaimed, holding the fragment aloft. This, Hastings, is a piece of the puzzle, a ledger page, burned in haste. And why burn such a thing? Unless it contains something one does not wish to be seen. Hastings peered over Poirot's shoulder. It's got Victor's name on it. Do you think he burned it? Perhaps, Poirot said, his voice thoughtful. Or perhaps someone wished us to believe he did. Come, let us return to the drawing room. There is more to learn about Monsieur Langston's financial troubles. Back in the drawing room, Poirot summoned Lady Evelyn Ashford, hoping to glean more about her late husband's business dealings. Lady Evelyn, elegant in her mourning black, entered with a composed air, though her eyes were red-rimmed from grief, or so it seemed. Poirot, ever observant, noted the faintest tremor in her hands as she smoothed her skirt. Madame, Poirot began, his tone gentle but firm, I am sorry to disturb you in your time of sorrow, but I must ask about your husband's financial arrangements with Monsieur Langston. It seems there was some tension between them. Lady Evelyn's lips tightened, but she nodded. Reginald was a hard man in business, Mr. Poirot. He lent Victor a substantial sum, tens of thousands. I believe because Victor's charm and promises of quick returns were persuasive. But lately, Reginald grew impatient. He felt Victor was not being entirely honest about his ventures. And did Sir Reginald speak of this to you? Poirot asked, his eyes never leaving her face. He did, she admitted. He said he was going to demand repayment or take legal action. Victor was furious when he heard Reginald told me. They argued just last week. Poirot nodded, filing away this information. And the night of the murder, Madame, where were you when the scream was heard? Lady Evelyn's eyes flickered, but she answered calmly, in my room, preparing for bed. I heard the scream and rushed downstairs, like everyone else. It was horrific, finding him like that. Oui, most horrific, Poirot agreed. Merci, Madame, you have been most helpful. As Lady Evelyn left, Hastings leaned in, his voice a whisper. She's hiding something, too, isn't she? Everyone in this house seems to have a secret. Poirot chuckled softly. Mon ami, in a house such as this, secrets are as common as the rain outside. But it is the nature of those secrets that matters. Let us now speak with Mademoiselle Beatrice Lyle. Her connection to Sir Reginald Dan to Victor may hold the key. Beatrice Lyle, the young heiress, was found in the conservatory, her delicate frame curled into a wicker chair, a book lying unopened in her lap. Her eyes, red from crying, widened as Poirot and Hastings approached. "Mr. Poirot," she said, her voice trembling, "have you found out who did this terrible thing?" "Not yet, mademoiselle," Poirot replied, his tone soothing. "But I am close, I think. Tell me, what was your relationship with Monsieur Langston? I have heard whispers of a debt, perhaps." Beatrice's cheeks flushed, and she looked away. "Victor ... he helped me once, when I needed money for personal matters. Sir Reginald didn't approve, but Victor was kind. I promised to repay him, but now, with Sir Reginald gone, I don't know what will happen." Poirot's eyes narrowed. This debt, was it significant? And did Sir Reginald know of it? Beatrice hesitated, then nodded. "It was a large sum. I didn't tell Sir Reginald, but he found out somehow. He was furious, said Victor was taking advantage of me. He threatened to cut me out of his will if I didn't break ties with Victor." Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings. "And did you break those ties, mademoiselle?" "I tried," Beatrice said, her voice barely audible. "But Victor ... he can be very persuasive. He said he needed my help, that we were in this together." Poirot's mind raced. Victor's influence over Beatrice, combined with his financial troubles, painted a troubling picture. But was he the killer, or merely a pawn in a larger game? The burned ledger page, the argument with Sir Reginald, the debt to Beatrice, all were threads in a tapestry Poirot was only beginning to unravel. As the day wore on, Poirot continued his interviews, piecing together the web of motives and alibis. Dr. Clara Thornton, when questioned again, admitted to knowing about Victor's debts but denied any involvement in the murder. Her evasive answers about her chemical research only deepened Poirot's suspicions. Harold Grayson, the reclusive scholar, remained tight-lipped, his nervous demeanor suggesting he knew more than he let on. By evening, Poirot and Hastings retired to their rooms, the weight of the investigation heavy on their minds. The manor seemed to close in around them, its shadows hiding truths that Poirot was determined to uncover. As he sat at his desk, examining the burned ledger page under a magnifying glass, Poirot murmured to himself, "Monsieur Langston, you are a man of many masks, but which one hides the face of a killer?" The next morning, Poirot's investigation took a new turn. A servant, tidying the study, discovered a small key hidden beneath a rug, a key that did not match any lock in the room. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he held it up to the light. "This, Hastings, is another piece of the puzzle. A key to what, I wonder? A safe, perhaps, or something more ... sinister." The search for the lock led Poirot to Sir Reginald's private office, a smaller room adjacent to the study. There, behind a portrait of Sir Reginald's father, Poirot found a hidden safe. The key fit perfectly, and inside, Poirot discovered a bundle of documents, contracts, letters, and a detailed account of Victor Langston's debts. The numbers were staggering, far more than Victor had admitted. But more intriguing was a letter, written in Sir Reginald's hand, accusing Victor of fraud and threatening to expose him to the authorities. "Hastings," Poirot said, his voice triumphant, "this is the motive we have sought. Victor Langston stood to lose everything: his reputation, his fortune, his freedom. But is he the mastermind, or merely a desperate man caught in another's web?" The day unfolded with more revelations. Poirot learned from a groundskeeper that Victor had been seen near the garden late at night, despite his claim of being in his room. The muddy footprint found earlier, near the garden path, was now a critical clue, though it still did not match Victor's shoes. Poirot began to suspect that the footprint was a deliberate misdirection, planned to confuse the investigation. As night fell, Poirot gathered the guests in the drawing room for an impromptu discussion, his demeanor calm, but his eyes alight with purpose. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, we are close to the truth. But the truth, it is like a fox cunning, elusive. Monsieur Langston, I must ask you once more, what were you doing in the garden last night? Victor's face paled, but he maintained his composure. I told you, Poirot, I was in my room. Whoever says otherwise is mistaken. Poirot nodded, as if accepting this, but his next words were sharp. And the ledger page, burned in the fireplace. The letter accusing you of fraud. These, too, are mistakes. The room fell silent, the guests exchanging uneasy glances. Victor's charm deserted him, his voice rising. This is absurd. I didn't kill Reginald? Yes, I owed him money. But I'm no murderer. Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. Calm yourself, monsieur. I do not yet accuse you of murder, but I say this, you are hiding something, and that something may lead us to the killer. I advise you to speak the truth, or the truth will find you. The gathering dispersed, but the tension lingered. Hastings, as always, was both awed and frustrated. By Poirot's methods, you've got him rattled, Poirot, but do you really think he's the killer? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Victor Langston is a man of ambition, Hastings, and ambition can drive a man to desperate acts. But I suspect he is not alone in this game. There is another, perhaps, pulling the strings. Tomorrow, we shall see what other secrets this manor hides. As the rain continued to fall outside, Poirot returned to his room, his mind a whirlwind of possibilities. The financier's gambit was clear. Victor Langston had much to lose, and his lies were unraveling, but the true mastermind, Poirot knew, was still out there, watching, waiting. The game was far from over, and Hercule Poirot was determined to outfox them all. Chapter 6. The heiress's tierce air in Ravenwood Manor seemed to thicken with each passing hour, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for the next calamity to unfold. The storm outside had grown fiercer, its howling, winds rattling the ancient windows and casting flickering shadows across the oak-paneled corridors. Hercule Poirot, his small frame impeccable in his neatly pressed suit, stood by the drawing-room fireplace, his sharp eyes scanning the assembled guests. The death of Sir Reginald Ashford had cast a pall over the gathering, and the tension among the remaining occupants was palpable, like a taut string ready to snap. Captain Hastings, ever the loyal companion, stood nearby, his brow furrowed as he tried to make sense of the locked-room mystery that had confounded even the local police. His notebook, filled with scribbled observations, lay open in his hand, though he admitted to Poirot earlier that the clues seemed to lead nowhere. It's a dashed puzzle, Poirot, he had muttered over breakfast. A man stabbed in a locked room. No fingerprints, no sign of a struggle. How does one even begin to unravel it? Poirot, however, was undeterred. His little gray cells, as he so often called them, were already weaving connections between the disparate threads of the case. The cryptic note found in Sir Reginald's hand, outfoxed at last, had particularly piqued his interest. It was not merely a taunt, it was a challenge, a deliberate breadcrumb left by a mind that believed itself cleverer than his own, and Poirot, with his unyielding faith in order and method, was determined to prove that mind wrong. The morning after the murder, the guests had gathered in the drawing-room, their faces a study in contrast, some pale with shock, others guarded, their eyes darting nervously. Lady Evelyn Ashford, Sir Reginald's widow, sat in a high-backed chair near the window, her delicate features composed, but her hands twisting a lace handkerchief with such force that it threatened to tear. Dr. Clara Thornton, the chemist, stood apart, her posture rigid, her gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the rain-streaked glass. Victor Langston, the financier, paced near the door, his usual charm replaced by a restless energy that made him seem like a caged animal. Harold Grayson, the scholar, sat hunched over a book, though his eyes barely moved across the page, suggesting his thoughts were elsewhere. And then there was Miss Beatrice Lyle, the young heiress, who had excused herself from the group shortly after breakfast, her eyes red-rimmed and her voice trembling. It was Beatrice who now occupied Poirot's thoughts. Her reaction to Sir Reginald's death had been visceral, tears streaming down her face, her hands shaking as she clutched a glass of water that morning. Yet there was something in her demeanor, a flicker of something unspoken, that had caught Poirot's attention. Grief? Yes, but also fear, and perhaps, he mused, guilt. Poirot excused himself from the drawing-room, gesturing for Hastings to follow. "Come, mon ami," he said, his voice slow but firm. "We must speak with Mademoiselle Lyle. There is something she knows, something she does not yet wish to share." Hastings nodded, though his expression betrayed his skepticism. "She's just a young girl, Poirot. Surely she can't be mixed up in this ghastly business." Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. The heart of a young girl, Hastings, can hold secrets as deep as any locked room. "Let us see what Mademoiselle Lyle's tears conceal." They found Beatrice in the conservatory, a glass-walled haven filled with exotic plants and the heavy scent of damp earth. The rain battered the panes, creating a rhythmic drumming that seemed to echo the tension in the room. Beatrice sat on a wrought-iron bench, her auburn hair falling loosely over her shoulders, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked up as Poirot and Hastings approached, her green eyes wide with apprehension. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't expect to see you here." Poirot inclined his head, his manner courteous, but probing. "Mademoiselle, it is the duty of Hercule Poirot to seek the truth, and I believe you may hold a piece of it. May we sit?" Beatrice nodded, and Poirot settled onto the bench opposite her, his posture impeccable despite the humid air. Hastings remained standing, his notebook at the ready, though he sensed this conversation would require more than mere note-taking. "Mademoiselle Lyle," Poirot began, his tone gentle but firm, "you are deeply affected by the death of Sir Reginald. This is understandable, for he was your guardian, n'est-ce pas? But I observe in you a grief that is, how shall I say, layered. There is more than sorrow in your tears. Will you share with Poirot what troubles you?" Beatrice's hands tightened in her lap, and for a moment, it seemed she might bolt from the room. But then her shoulders slumped, and a fresh wave of tears welled in her eyes. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice breaking, "I don't know where to begin. Sir Reginald, he was like a father to me, but he was also so controlling, and now he's gone, and I'm so afraid." "Afraid of what, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked, leaning forward slightly, his eyes never leaving her face. Beatrice hesitated, glancing at Hastings as if seeking reassurance. He offered her a kind smile, which seemed to bolster her courage. "Sir Reginald was going to change his will," she said at last, her voice trembling. "He told me so at dinner, though he didn't say how. I was to inherit a great deal, you see. My parents left me nothing, and Sir Reginald took me in when I was a child. He promised I would always be provided for. But lately, he'd been angry with me." Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. "Angry? For what reason?" Beatrice bit her lip, her gaze dropping to the floor. It's about Tom," she said, so softly that Poirot had to strain to hear her. "Tom Reed. He's my fiancé. Or he was, until Sir Reginald found out." Hastings, unable to contain his surprise, interjected, "Your fiancé? But who is this Tom Reed? I don't recall meeting him among the guests." Beatrice shook her head, her tears spilling over. "He's not here. Tom used to work for Sir Reginald, in the gardens. He was the groundskeeper's assistant, but Sir Reginald sacked him a few months ago. He called Tom disreputable, said he wasn't good enough for me. But I love him, Monsieur Poirot, I love him, and now I'm afraid he might be in danger." Poirot's expression remained unreadable, but his mind was racing. A disgraced former employee, a secret engagement, a will about to be changed, these were threads that could weave a tapestry of motive. "Mademoiselle," he said carefully, "why do You fear for Monsieur Reed's safety. Has he made threats against Sir Reginald? No. Beatrice's voice was sharp, almost defensive. Tom would never. He's not like that. But Sir Reginald was so cruel to him, and now with this murder. I'm afraid someone might think Tom had something to do with it. He was so angry when he left Ravenwood, and he said things he didn't mean, I'm sure. But if the police find out, Poirot held up a hand, silencing her gently. Calm yourself, mademoiselle. Let us proceed with order and method. Tell me, when did you last see Monsieur Reed? Beatrice hesitated, her fingers twisting the hem of her dress. A week ago, she admitted. He came to the village nearby. I slipped away to meet him in secret. He wanted me to run away with him, but I couldn't, not yet. I told him we had to wait until Sir Reginald calmed down. And did Sir Reginald know of this meeting? Poirot asked. I don't think so, Beatrice said, but her uncertainty was evident. He was suspicious, though. He kept asking where I'd been, who I'd been seeing. He even threatened to send me away to a convent if I didn't obey him. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A convent, that is most severe. And what of your inheritance, mademoiselle? If Sir Reginald was to change his will, what would become of you? Beatrice's face crumpled, and she buried it in her hands. I don't know, she sobbed. He said he'd leave me nothing if I didn't break things off with Tom. He said I was ungrateful, that I'd betrayed his trust. But I didn't want his money, Monsieur Poirot. I just wanted to be free. Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. The picture was becoming clearer, though not yet complete. Beatrice Lyle, the heiress, stood to lose everything, her fortune, her future, her love. Such desperation could drive a person to drastic measures, but Poirot sensed that Beatrice's tears were genuine, her fear for her fiancé real. Yet there was something she was not saying, a piece of the puzzle she was holding back. Merci, mademoiselle, Poirot said at last, rising from the bench. You have been most helpful, but I must ask you to remain here at Ravenwood. Do not attempt to contact Monsieur Reed until we have spoken again. Comprenez-vous? Beatrice nodded, wiping her eyes. Yes, Monsieur Poirot, I trust you. As Poirot and Hastings left the conservatory, the rain continued its relentless assault on the manor. Hastings, his mind buzzing with questions, turned to Poirot. Do you think she's telling the truth, Poirot, about this Tom fellow? I mean, it sounds like he had reason to hate Sir Reginald. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Indeed, Hastings. A man scorned, dismissed, and separated from his love. This is a man with motive, but motive alone does not a murderer make. We must find this Tom Reed and hear his story. And there is another matter that intrigues me. What's that? Hastings asked, his curiosity piqued. Poirot paused, his eyes gleaming with the spark of discovery. The footprint, mon ami, the muddy footprint in the garden, near the study window. It did not match the shoes of any guest we have questioned. But if, as Mademoiselle Lyle says, Tom Reed was once employed here, he would know the grounds well. Perhaps he knows more than Mademoiselle Lyle believes. Hastings frowned, trying to follow Poirot's train of thought. You think Tom Reed was here the night of the murder. But how? The gates were locked, and the staff would have noticed a stranger. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. A stranger, perhaps. But a man who knows the manor's secrets, that is, another matter entirely. Come, Hastings, we must examine the garden more closely. The two men donned coats and ventured into the storm, the wind whipping at their faces as they made their way to the garden path that ran alongside the study. The ground was sodden, the grass churned into a muddy quagmire by the relentless rain. Poirot crouched near the spot where the footprint had been found, his eyes scanning the earth with the precision of a hawk. There, he said, pointing to a faint impression in the mud, partially washed away, but still visible. It is as I thought. This is no ordinary footprint, Hastings. See the shape, the depth. It is the mark of a man's boot, heavy, with a distinctive tread. And look here, A second mark, fainter, as if he stepped lightly to avoid detection. Hastings squinted, struggling to see what Poirot found so obvious. But how can you be sure it's Tom Reed's? It could belong to anyone, a poacher, a villager. Poirot shook his head. Nong, Hastings. This is no casual trespasser. The footprint is near the study window, precisely where one might stand to observe or to enter, and it is fresh, made within the last day or two, before the rain began to blur it. We must speak with the groundskeeper. He will know if any stranger has been seen on the estate. The groundskeeper, a grizzled man named Mr. Potts, was found in the shed, repairing a rake. He was a man of few words, his face weathered by years of outdoor labor. When Poirot questioned him about Tom Reed, Potts's expression darkened. Tom Reed, eh? I remember him, Potts said, his voice gruff. Good worker, but headstrong. Sir Reginald didn't take kindly to his cheek. Sacked him after he caught him sneaking about with Miss Beatrice. Haven't seen him since, and good riddance, I say. And the night of the murder, Poirot pressed, did you see anyone near the manor? Any sign of an intruder? Potts scratched his chin, his eyes narrowing. Can't say I did, sir. The storm was coming in, and I was in my cottage by the gate. But, now you mention it, I did find something odd yesterday morning. A pair of boots in the shed, caked with mud. Not mine, nor any of the lads. Thought it was strange, but with all the commotion, I didn't think much of it. Poirot's eyes lit up. Show me these boots, monsieur, if you please. Potts led them to the shed, where a pair of worn leather boots sat in a corner. There, sawless crusted with dried mud. Poirot examined them closely, noting the tread pattern. Exactement, he murmured, the same as the footprint in the garden. These boots, they are not yours, you say? No, sir, Potts replied. Never seen 'em before yesterday. Poirot straightened, his expression one of quiet triumph. Then we have a clue, Hastings, a most important clue. These boots belong to our mysterious visitor, and I suspect that visitor is none other than Tom Reed. Hastings, still struggling to keep up, asked, but why would Tom Reed come back? And how does this connect to the locked room? The study was sealed tight, no one could have gotten in or out. Poirot's smile was maddeningly cryptic. Patience, mon ami. The locked room is not so impenetrable as it seems. But first, we must find Monsieur Reed. He holds the key to this mystery, or, at the very least, a piece of it. The search for Tom Reed proved more challenging than Poirot had anticipated. The village near Ravenwood Manor was small, its inhabitants tight-lipped about strangers. The local innkeeper, a stout woman with a sharp tongue, claimed no one matching Tom's description had been seen in weeks. But Poirot, undeterred, employed his charm and persistence, questioning shopkeepers, farmers, and even the postman. At last, a clue emerged. A stable boy at the edge of the village had seen a man fitting Tom's description, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair, lurking near the manor's gates 2 nights before the murder. He didn't stop to chat, the boy said, chewing on a piece of straw. Just stood there, watching the house. Looked angry, he did. Then he was gone. Quick, as you like. Poirot thanked the boy with a coin and turned to Hastings. It is as I suspected. Tom Reed was here, and he was not merely passing by. He had purpose, Hastings, purpose and anger. The investigation took them back to Ravenwood Manor, where Poirot requested a private audience with Lady Evelyn. The widow, still pale and composed, received them in her private sitting room, a space filled with delicate porcelain and faded photographs. She listened as Poirot recounted their findings, her expression unreadable. Lady Evelyn, Poirot said, his tone measured, you were close to Mademoiselle Lyle, were you not? Did you know of her engagement to Tom Reed? Lady Evelyn's lips tightened, but she nodded. Yes, I knew. Beatrice confided in me some months ago. I warned her that Reginald would not approve, but she was determined. Young love, monsieur. Poirot, it is a force that defies reason, and did Sir Reginald speak to you of his plans to change his will? Poirot asked. He did. Lady Evelyn replied, her voice steady. He was furious about Beatrice's defiance. He felt she was throwing away her future on a man who could offer her nothing. He intended to leave her only a small stipend, enough to live modestly, but nothing more. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And you, madame, what did you think of this decision? Lady Evelyn hesitated, her fingers tightening around her handkerchief. I thought it harsh, she admitted. Beatrice is a good girl, and I believe she deserved better. But Reginald was not a man to be swayed once his mind was made up. Poirot nodded, filing away this information. Lady Evelyn's sympathy for Beatrice was genuine, but there was a guarded quality to her words, a hint of something unspoken. He made a mental note to revisit her later, when more pieces of the puzzle were in place. As the day wore on, Poirot and Hastings continued their inquiries, piecing together the fragmented lives of the guests. Dr. Clara Thornton remained evasive, her answers about her chemical research vague and unsatisfying. Victor Langston's financial troubles grew clearer with each question, his charm unable to mask the desperation in his eyes. Harold Grayson, the scholar, retreated further into silence, his nervous glances suggesting he knew more than he was willing to share. But it was the muddy footprint and the mysterious boots that kept drawing Poirot's attention. They were a tangible link to Tom Reed, a man who had vanished from Ravenwood but whose presence lingered like a shadow. Poirot was certain that Tom was the key to unlocking the mystery, not as the murderer, perhaps, but as a piece of the larger game being played. That evening, as the storm reached its peak, Poirot stood alone in the study, the scene of Sir Reginald's death. The room was as it had been locked, impenetrable, a puzzle that defied logic. He paced the floor, his eyes scanning every detail, the heavy desk, the leather-bound books, the fireplace with its smoldering embers. And then, in a flash of insight, he saw a faint scratch on the floor near the bookshelf, barely visible. In the dim light, he knelt, running his fingers along the wood. Mon Dieu, he murmured, it is here, the answer to the locked room. Hastings, who had just entered, looked puzzled. What is it, Poirot? Have you found something? Poirot rose, his face alight with excitement. Not something, Hastings. Somewhere, a passage, perhaps, or a hidden door. The footprint, the boots, the locked room, they are all connected. Tomorrow, we shall uncover the truth, but for now, we must watch, and we must listen. The killer believes they have outfoxed Poirot, but they are mistaken. The little gray cells, they do not rest. As the night closed in, the manor seemed to hold its secrets tighter, the storm a fitting backdrop to the drama unfolding within its walls. Beatrice Lyle's tears, Tom Reed's anger, the muddy footprint in the garden, all were threads in a tapestry that Poirot was determined to unravel. The game was afoot, and Hercule Poirot was ready to play. Chapter 7. The scholar's silence. The storm that had battered Ravenwood Manor through the night seemed to relent by morning, though the sky remained a sullen gray, casting a pall over the sprawling estate. The air inside the manor was thick with unease, as if the very walls held their breath, waiting for the next calamity. Hercule Poirot, ever composed, sat in the drawing-room, his small, precise hands folded neatly over his lap, his mustache impeccably groomed despite the chaos of the previous night. Captain Hastings, by contrast, paced near the tall windows, his brow furrowed as he glanced out at the sodden grounds. Poirot, Hastings said, turning sharply, this whole affair is a devilish puzzle, a locked room, a dead man, and now every guest seems to have a secret. I don't know where to begin. Poirot's eyes twinkled with that familiar spark of intellectual delight. Mon ami, the puzzle is indeed complex, but it is not without its patterns. The secrets, they are like threads in a tapestry, each one must be followed, untangled, to reveal the design beneath. We begin, as always, with observation. Hastings sighed, running a hand through his hair. Observation. You make it sound so simple. But this scholar, Grayson, what do we really know about him? He's been quiet as a mouse since we arrived, always tucked away with his books. Do you think he's hiding something? Poirot tilted his head, considering. Monsieur Grayson is, perhaps, the most enigmatic of our company. His silence is not merely the absence of speech. Hastings, it is a shield. But what does it protect? That is what we must discover. Come, let us pay him a visit. The two men made their way through the manor's labyrinth in corridors, the dark wood paneling and heavy tapestries lending an oppressive weight to the journey. The library, where Harold Grayson had claimed to be at the time of Sir Reginald's murder, was tucked away in a quiet wing of the house. Its double doors, carved with intricate vines, loomed like sentinels as Poirot knocked lightly. Enter, came a low, measured voice. Inside, the library was a cavern of knowledge, its walls lined with towering bookshelves that stretched to the coffered ceiling. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room. Harold Grayson sat at a long oak table, a thick tome open before him, his wire-rimmed spectacles perched low on his nose. He looked up as Poirot and Hastings entered, his expression guarded but not hostile. Monsieur Grayson, Poirot began, his tone polite but firm, I trust we do not disturb you unduly. Grayson closed the book with a soft thud, his fingers lingering on the leather cover. Not at all, Monsieur Poirot. I expected you might wish to speak with me, given recent events. Hastings noted the man's calm demeanor, his pale hands steady despite the weight of suspicion hanging over the manor. Grayson was a slight figure, with thinning gray hair and a scholarly stoop, his tweed suit slightly rumpled as though he cared little for appearances. Yet there was a sharpness in his eyes, a flicker of intellect that belied his unassuming presence. Poirot settled into a chair opposite Grayson, his posture immaculate. You are a man of learning, Monsieur Grayson, are you not? A scholar of some renown, I understand, with a particular interest in toxicology, perhaps. Grayson's fingers twitched slightly, the first sign of unease. I study many subjects, Monsieur Poirot. Toxicology is but one of them, a natural extension of my work in chemistry and botany, but I assure you, my interests are purely academic. Purely academic, Poirot repeated, his voice soft but probing. And yet, in a house where a man has been murdered, such knowledge takes on a new significance, does it not? Tell me, where were you precisely when Sir Reginald met his unfortunate end? Grayson adjusted his spectacles, his gaze steady. As I told Inspector Japp, I was here, in the library, reading. I often spend my evenings with a book. It helps me think. The storm was quite loud, but I find such weather conducive to study. Hastings, standing near a shelf, glanced at the titles around him, dense volumes on chemistry, pharmacology, and obscure plants. One book, slightly askew, caught his eye, treatise on toxic substances. He pulled it from the shelf, noting a bookmark tucked between its pages. This looks like heavy reading, Grayson, he said, holding it up. Were you studying this last night? Grayson's lips tightened briefly. I may have glanced at it. My research often touches on the properties of various compounds, but I fail to see how this is relevant. Poirot's smile was almost imperceptible. Everything is relevant, Monsieur Grayson, until it is proven otherwise. You see, the death of Sir Reginald was no ordinary crime. A locked room, a letter opener, a cryptic note, these are not the work of an impulsive mind. They suggest planning, precision, and perhaps a knowledge of how to obscure one's traces. Grayson leaned back, his expression unreadable. You suspect me? Then, I had no quarrel with Sir Reginald. He was my patron. In a sense, he funded my research, allowed me access to this magnificent library. Why would I harm him? Pourquoi, indeed, Poirot mused. But patronage can be a double-edged sword, can it not? It creates obligations, dependencies, resentments, perhaps. Tell me, what was the nature of your connection to Sir Reginald? Beyond his generosity, of course. Grayson hesitated, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. He was interested in my work, particularly in the practical applications of certain compounds. We corresponded for years before I came to Ravenwood. He saw potential in my studies, potential for his business, I suppose, and these compounds, Poirot pressed, they included substances of a dangerous nature. Grayson's eyes narrowed. All knowledge is dangerous in the wrong hands, Monsieur Poirot, but I am a scholar, not a criminal. I studied to understand, not to harm. Hastings, growing restless, interjected. Look here, Grayson, you're awfully calm for a man under suspicion. Everyone else is rattled, but you sit here reading as if nothing's happened. Doesn't it bother you that Sir Reginald was murdered just down the hall? Grayson's gaze flicked to Hastings, a hint of irritation breaking through his composure. Of course it bothers me, Captain, but I am not a man given to hysterics. I find solace in my work, it keeps my mind clear. Poirot nodded, as if satisfied, though his eyes betrayed a relentless curiosity. Very well, Monsieur Grayson. For now, I have only one more question. This book, he gestured to the treatise on toxic substances in Hastings' hands. It is bookmarked at a chapter on curare, a most fascinating poison. Paralytic, undetectable in small doses, derived from certain South American plants. Why this chapter, Monsieur? Grayson's face paled slightly, but he recovered quickly. Curare is a subject of academic interest, nothing more. Its properties have been studied for centuries. I was simply refreshing my knowledge. Refreshing, Poirot echoed, his tone neutral. Merci, Monsieur Grayson, you have been most cooperative. We shall speak again, I am sure. As they left the library, Hastings glanced back at Grayson, who had already reopened his book, his face a mask of concentration. What do you make of him, Poirot? He's slippery, I'll give you that. All this talk of academic interest, do you believe him? Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. Belief, mon ami, is a luxury we cannot afford. Monsieur Grayson is a man who hides behind his intellect, but there is more to him than he reveals. The bookmark, the curare it is to precise to be. Coincidence. And yet, I do not think he is our murderer. Not yet. They returned to the drawing room, where Inspector Japp was waiting, his notebook open and his expression harried. Well, Poirot, any luck with the scholar, or is he as useless as the rest of this lot? Poirot raised a hand, forestalling Japp's impatience. Patience, my dear Inspector. Monsieur Grayson is a piece of the puzzle, but the picture is not yet clear. Tell me, have your men searched the study again? There is something we have overlooked, I am certain. Japp sighed. We've turned the place upside down. Nothing but papers, books, and that blasted note outfoxed at last. Sounds like the killers having a laugh at our expense. Perhaps, Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. But the note is more than a taunt. It is a signature. A clue to the mind behind this crime. We must look deeper. Inspector, there is something in that study, something we have not yet seen. Determined to leave no stone unturned, Poirot led Hastings and Japp back to Sir Reginald's study. The room was as they had left it, the heavy oak desk, the leather-bound ledgers, the locked windows, and the door still sealed from the inside at the time of the murder. Poirot moved with deliberate care, his eyes scanning every surface. He paused. At the desk, where a small inkwell sat, its lid slightly askew. Curio, he murmured, lifting the lid. Inside, nestled among the pens, was a small key, no larger than a thimble. And what, I wonder, does this unlock? Hastings peered over his shoulder. A key. Could it be for the desk drawers? We checked them, but they were empty. Not the drawers, mon ami, Poirot said, his voice tinged with excitement. This is a key for something more discreet. He moved to the bookshelf behind the desk, his fingers tracing the spines of the books. One, a worn volume on industrial chemistry, seemed slightly out of place. With a gentle tug, Poirot pulled it forward, and a soft click echoed in the room. The bookshelf shifted, revealing a narrow panel that concealed a small safe, its lock gleaming in the dim light. Poirot inserted the key, and with a satisfying turn, the safe opened. Inside was a single document, written in a dense, coded script. Good heavens, Poirot! Hastings exclaimed, a hidden safe. How did you know? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. The little gray cells, mon ami, they notice what others overlook. This document, it is the key to our mystery. I am certain, but it will require time to decipher. Jap, peering at the cryptic text, groaned. More riddles. This case is nothing but riddles. What's it say? Poirot. Poirot's eyes gleamed as he studied the page. It is a code, Inspector, but one I have seen before. Simple substitution cipher. Perhaps, but its meaning, that is what will lead us to the truth. For now, we must keep this discovery to ourselves. The killer is among us, and they must not know we have found their secret. As they left the study, Hastings couldn't shake the feeling that Grayson's calm demeanor hid a deeper truth. The scholar's knowledge of poisons, his connection to Sir Reginald, and now this coded document, it all pointed to a web of intrigue that Poirot was only beginning to unravel. The manor seemed to close in around them, its shadows whispering of secrets yet to be uncovered. Over the next few hours, Poirot retreated to his room, the coded document spread before him. He worked with a pencil and paper, his brow furrowed in concentration as he tested various ciphers. Hastings, unable to sit still, wandered the manor, observing the other guests. Lady Evelyn was pale, but composed, tending to the household with a quiet efficiency that seemed almost mechanical. Victor Langston was nowhere to be seen, though Hastings caught a glimpse of him slipping out to the stables, his expression furtive. Beatrice Lyle sat in the conservatory, her eyes red from crying, while Dr. Clara Thornton remained in her room, claiming a headache. By evening, Poirot emerged, his expression one of quiet triumph. The code, Hastings, it is broken. The document is a list of Sir Reginald's investments, but not the ordinary kind. It details a secret deal with a foreign company, one that involves a certain chemical formula. And who do we know with the expertise to create such a formula? Dr. Thornton, Hastings exclaimed. But what about Grayson? His book on poisons, his evasiveness. Poirot raised a hand. Monsieur Grayson is involved. Of that I am certain. But his role is not yet clear. The formula, the investments, the murder, they are all connected, but the thread that binds them is still hidden. We must proceed with care. Mon ami, the killer is watching, and they are clever, very clever. As night fell, the manor grew quiet, the storm's last echoes fading into the distance. But for Poirot, the real storm was just beginning. The scholars, silence, the hidden safe, the coded document, all were pieces of a puzzle that pointed to a mind as sharp as his own. And somewhere in Ravenwood Manor, that mind was waiting, ready to strike again. The next morning, Poirot gathered the guests. In the drawing-room, his demeanor calm but authoritative. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, we are in the midst of a most intricate game. A man has been murdered, and the truth lies not in what is said, but in what is concealed. I urge you all to be vigilant, for the killer is among us, and they will not hesitate to act again. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, their faces a mixture of fear and suspicion. Grayson, seated near the back, adjusted his spectacles, his expression unreadable. Lady Evelyn clasped her hands tightly, while Victor's jaw tightened, his eyes darting to the door. Beatrice bit her lip, and Dr. Thornton's face was a mask of guarded composure. Hastings watched them all, his mind racing. Poirot, he whispered as they left the room, you're stirring the pot, aren't you? Trying to flush out the killer. Poirot nodded, his eyes gleaming. Exactement, mon ami. The killer is clever, but they are not infallible. They will make a mistake, and when they do, Hercule Poirot will be waiting. The day passed in a haze of tension, with the guests avoiding one another's gaze, their conversation stilted and cautious. Poirot spent much of the time in the library, poring over Grayson's books, searching for any clue that might link the scholar to the crime. He found nothing definitive, but the bookmark in the treatise on toxic substances continued to nag at him. Curare was a poison of precision, requiring knowledge and access, both of which Grayson possessed in abundance. That evening, as the guests gathered for dinner, a sense of foreboding hung over the table. Lady Evelyn, ever the gracious hostess, served tea, her hands steady despite the strain in her eyes. Poirot watched her closely, noting the way she lingered near Grayson's cup, her movements almost too deliberate. "Madame Ashford," he said, suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence, "you are most attentive to our comfort. But tell me, do you always serve the tea yourself?" Lady Evelyn froze, her smile faltering. "It is my duty as hostess, Monsieur Poirot. I take pride in it." "Of course," Poirot said smoothly, but his eyes never left her. Hastings, catching the exchange, felt a chill. Was Poirot onto something? Was Lady Evelyn, with her quiet grace, hiding a darker truth? As the meal concluded, Grayson rose, excusing himself to return to the library. Poirot watched him go, his mind racing. The scholar's silence was a puzzle within a puzzle, and Poirot was determined to solve it. But before he could follow, a cry rang out from the library, a cry of pain, followed by a heavy thud. Hastings and Poirot rushed to the scene, the other guests trailing behind. They found Grayson slumped over the table, his face contorted in agony, a chess piece of black king clutched in his hand. Dr. Thornton, who had followed them, knelt beside him, checking his pulse. "He's dead," she said, her voice shaking. "Poison, I'd wager. His symptoms paralysis, dilated pupils. It's consistent with something like curare." Poirot's face was grim as he surveyed the scene. The chess piece, the poison, the library, it was all too deliberate, too staged. The killer was taunting him, daring him to unravel their game. But Hercule Poirot was not a man to be outfoxed. "Hastings," he said quietly, "this is no longer a game of one murder. The killer has struck again, and they will not stop until their plan is complete. We must act quickly, for the truth is closer than we think." As the guests stood frozen, their faces pale with shock, Poirot's mind was already at work, piecing together the clues. The scholar's silence had been broken not by words, but by death. And in that silence, Poirot heard the whisper of a mastermind, a criminal brain as sharp as any he had ever faced. The game was far from over, but Hercule Poirot was ready to play. Chapter 8. The code unraveled. The rain had not relented, its relentless patter against the leaded windows of Ravenwood Manor a constant reminder of the storm that had trapped them all within these stone walls. Hercule Poirot sat in the dimly lit library, his small, precise hands folded neatly over his lap, his mustache impeccably groomed despite the hour. The air was thick with the scent of old leather and damp wood, and the fire in the hearth cast flickering shadows across the rows of books that lined the walls. Captain Hastings, ever the loyal companion, paced near the window, his brow furrowed as he wrestled with the complexities of the case. "Poirot," Hastings said, pausing to glance at his friend, "this locked room business is driving me mad. How could anyone have entered Sir Reginald's study, stabbed him, and left without a trace? And now this note, outfoxed at last. It's as if the killer is mocking us." Poirot's eyes gleamed with a quiet intensity, his head tilted slightly as if listening to a melody only he could hear. "Mocking? Yes, mon ami, but not without purpose. The criminal mind, it is like a chess player, always thinking 3 moves ahead. But they forget Hercule Poirot is no mere pawn. The note, it is a clue, not a taunt. It is a window into the mind of the killer." Hastings stopped pacing and turned to face Poirot, his expression one of exasperation. "A clue, it's gibberish, and now we have this coded document from the safe. It's all numbers and letters. Poirot, how are we supposed to make sense of it?" Poirot rose from his chair with the grace of a cat, his movements deliberate as he crossed to the table where the document in question lay. It was a single sheet of paper, yellowed at the edges, covered in a grid of seemingly random characters. To the untrained eye, it was incomprehensible, but to Poirot, it was a puzzle begging to be solved. He adjusted his pince-nez and studied the page, his lips pursed in concentration. The code, he murmured. It is not so impenetrable as it seems. Every code, Hastings, has a key, and every key is crafted by the mind of its creator. We must think as they think, see as they see. Hastings leaned over Poirot's shoulder, squinting at the document. It looks like a ledger of some sort. Investments, perhaps. Sir Reginald was a businessman, after all. Precisement, Poirot said, his voice low but firm. But not just any investments. This document, it speaks of secrets worth killing for. Let us begin. He took a pencil from the table and began to scribble notes in the margins of a nearby notepad, his hand moving with the precision of a surgeon. The code was a substitution cipher, he deduced, but one layered with complexity. The numbers appeared to correspond to letters, but the sequence was irregular, suggesting a secondary pattern. Poirot's mind raced, piecing together fragments of information from the interviews he had conducted over the past day. Dr. Clara Thornton, the chemist, had spoken of a revolutionary formula compound that could transform Sir Reginald's industrial empire. Victor Langston, the financier, had been evasive about his dealings with Sir Reginald, hinting at financial strain. And then there was the cryptic note, outfoxed at last, written in Sir Reginald's hand, or so it seemed. Poirot's intuition told him that the note and the code were linked to pieces of the same puzzle. For hours, Poirot worked, his focus unbroken even as the fire dwindled and the room grew colder. Hastings, unable to keep up with Poirot's mental acrobatics, eventually slumped into an armchair, his eyes heavy with fatigue. "I don't know how you do it, Poirot," he muttered. "All these numbers and letters, they drive a lesser man to distraction." Poirot smiled faintly, not looking up from his work. "Patience, Hastings, the mind, it must be disciplined. The little gray cells, they do not tire so easily." By the early hours of the morning, Poirot had made progress. The code, he discovered, was based on a Polybius square, a grid where letters were represented by pairs of numbers. But the key to unlocking it lay in a phrase that Sir Reginald himself had chosen. Poirot tested several possibilities, drawing on his knowledge of the man's habits and personality. Sir Reginald had been a man of order, a man who valued tradition. The phrase, Poirot reasoned, would be something personal, something tied to his legacy. After several false starts, Poirot tried the phrase, Ravenwood legacy. The numbers aligned, and the letters began to form words. The document, when decoded, revealed a list of investments, but not ordinary ones. It detailed a secret deal with a foreign company, one that involved Dr. Thornton's formula and Victor Langston's financial expertise. The deal was worth millions, but it was shrouded in secrecy, hinting at industrial espionage or even sabotage. Poirot leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "Mon Dieu," he whispered, "this is the heart of the matter. The motive, it lies here." Hastings stirred, blinking awake. "You've cracked it. What does it say?" Poirot handed him the decoded document, now neatly transcribed in his precise handwriting. "It is a contract, Hastings, a contract that binds Sir Reginald, Dr. Thornton, and Mr. Langston to a foreign entity. The formula, it is not merely a chemical breakthrough, it is a weapon, or could be, in the wrong hands. And someone in this manner did not wish this deal to come to light." Hastings scanned the document, his eyes widening. "Good heavens, Poirot, this is explosive. But who would kill to protect it, or to destroy it?" Poirot tapped his temple lightly. "That, mon ami, is what we must discover. But there is more. The note outfoxed at last. It is not in Sir Reginald's hand. It is a forgery, meant to mislead the killer. They wish us to believe Sir Reginald wrote it in his final moments. But why? To suggest suicide, or to point us toward a false motive. Before Hastings could respond, a scream shattered the silence of the manor. It came from the library's direction, just down the hall. Poirot was on his feet in an instant, his cane in hand, moving with surprising speed for a man of his stature. Hastings followed, his heart pounding as they hurried toward the source of the sound. They burst into the library to find Miss Beatrice Lyle standing over the body of Harold Grayson, the reclusive scholar. Grayson lay slumped in an armchair, his face pale, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. In his hand, he clutched a chess piece of black king. The room was in disarray, books scattered on the floor, a teacup shattered beside the chair. Beatrice was trembling, her hands pressed to her mouth. "I came to return a book," she stammered. "He was just like this. He's dead, isn't he?" Poirot knelt beside Grayson, his expression unreadable. He examined the body carefully, noting the faint bluish tinge around Grayson's lips and the faint odor of almonds emanating from the teacup's remains. "Poison," he said softly, "a swift and deadly one. Cyanide, perhaps, or something similar." Hastings looked around, his mind racing. "Another murder. Poirot, this is getting out of hand. First Sir Reginald, now Grayson. Who's next?" Poirot stood, brushing a speck of dust from his sleeve. "That, Hastings, is what the killer wishes us to ask. Fear, it is their weapon. But Hercule Poirot does not succumb to fear. We must act quickly, before the killer strikes again." He turned to Beatrice, his gaze piercing. "Mademoiselle, you say you came to return a book. At this hour, it is most curious." "Non." Beatrice flushed, her eyes darting to the floor. I couldn't sleep. I thought reading might help." Poirot nodded, but his expression suggested he was far from convinced. He moved to the table where Grayson had been sitting, picking up a book that lay open beside him. It was a volume on toxicology, book marked at a page discussing cyanide poisoning. Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. "Most interesting," he murmured. "Monsieur Grayson, it seems, was studying the very means of his demise." The arrival of Inspector Japp and his men interrupted further questioning. Japp, his face grim, surveyed the scene. "Another one, Poirot. This is a regular slaughterhouse. What's your take on it?" Poirot gestured to the chess piece in Grayson's hand. "The killer, they are playing a game, Inspector. The Black King, it is a symbol. Perhaps they see themselves as the master of this board, moving us all as pawns. But they have made a mistake. The chess piece, it is too deliberate, too theatrical. It tells us something of their mind." Japp grunted, clearly unconvinced. "Theatrical or not, we've got to bodies and no clear suspect." "What about that code you were working on? Anything useful?" Poirot handed Japp the decoded document. "This, Inspector, is the key. It ties Sir Reginald's murder to Monsieur Grayson's. Both men were involved in a deal, a dangerous one. Dr. Thornton's formula, it is at the center. And Monsieur Langston, he is not as innocent as he claims." Japp's eyes narrowed as he read the document. "This is big, Poirot. Industrial espionage, you say. That's a motive for murder. All right. But who's pulling the strings?" Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "That, Inspector, is what we shall discover. But first, we must examine the tea. The poison, it was administered recently. Who served Monsieur Grayson his tea this evening?" Beatrice, still pale, spoke up. "It was Lady Evelyn. She insisted on serving tea to everyone after dinner. She said it was her duty as hostess." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Lady Evelyn, you say? Most interesting. And where is she now?" As if on cue, Lady Evelyn appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of shock. "What's happened? I heard a scream. Is someone hurt?" Poirot studied her closely, noting the slight tremor in her hands, the way her eyes flickered toward Grayson's body. "Madame," he said, his voice soft but commanding, "Monsieur Grayson is dead. Poisoned, it seems, by the tea you so kindly served." Lady Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Poisoned, That's impossible. I would never. Poirot raised a hand, silencing her. We shall see, madame. The truth, it has a way of revealing itself. For now, no one leaves this manor. The game, it is far from over. The rest of the morning was a flurry of activity. Japp's men cordoned off the library, taking samples of the tea and searching Grayson's belongings. Poirot, meanwhile, retreated to a quiet corner of the manor, his mind working tirelessly. The chess piece, the poison, the coded document all were pieces of a larger puzzle, but the picture was still incomplete. He returned to the study, where Sir Reginald's body had been found, and re-examined the scene. The locked room had baffled them all, but Poirot's instincts told him the answer lay in the manor itself. He ran his fingers along the bookshelves, tapping lightly, listening for hollow sounds. After several minutes, he paused, his hand resting on a copy of The Hound of the Baskervilles. With a gentle push, the shelf clicked and swung inward, revealing a narrow passage. Hastings. Poirot called, his voice sharp with excitement. Come quickly. Hastings hurried over, his eyes wide as he peered into the passage. Good Lord, Poirot, a secret passage. This changes everything. Oui, mon ami, Poirot said, stepping into the passage. The locked room, it is no longer a mystery. The killer, they used this to enter and leave undetected. But why? And how did they know of its existence? The passage led to the garden, emerging behind a cluster of rose bushes. Poirot noted the muddy footprint he had seen earlier. Now certain it was linked to the killer's movements, the footprint was too small for a man's shoe, but it did not match any of the guest's footwear. Poirot's mind raced, considering the possibility of an outsider or someone within the manor who had access to another pair of shoes. As they returned to the manor, Poirot's thoughts turned to Dr. Thornton, her formula, her evasive answers, her knowledge of chemicals. It all pointed to her involvement. But was she the mastermind, or merely a pawn in a larger game? And Lady Evelyn, her grief seemed genuine, but Poirot had seen many a performance in his time. The chess piece, the Black King, suggested a mind that delighted in control, in manipulation. Someone was playing a dangerous game, and Poirot was determined to checkmate them. Over the next few hours, Poirot interviewed the remaining guests again, probing for inconsistencies. Victor Langston, when pressed, admitted to knowing about the secret deal, but insisted he was merely a middleman. I brokered the contract, he said, his voice smooth but strained. Sir Reginald trusted me to handle the details. But I didn't kill him, Poirot. I had no reason to. Poirot's eyes narrowed. No reason. Monsieur, a man in debt, with creditors breathing down his neck, has every reason to fear the loss of his patron. Sir Reginald, he was about to demand repayment, was he not? Victor paled but said nothing, his silence damning. Dr. Thornton, meanwhile, was more forthcoming. The formula, she said, her voice low, it was meant to revolutionize industry. But it could be weaponized. Sir Reginald knew that. He wanted to sell it to the highest bidder, regardless of the consequences. I tried to warn him, but he wouldn't listen, and so, Poirot said, leaning forward, you took matters into your own hands, perhaps with a letter opener, or a vial of poison. Dr. Thornton's eyes widened. No, I'm a scientist, not a murderer. I was in my room when Sir Reginald died. You have to believe me. Poirot did not respond, but his silence was as piercing as any question. He turned his attention to Beatrice, whose tears had dried but whose nervousness remained. Mademoiselle, he said gently, you spoke of a debt to Monsieur Langston, and of a fiancé, one Sir Reginald disapproved of. Tell me, who is this man? Beatrice hesitated, then whispered, his name is Tom Reed. He worked for Sir Reginald years ago, but they parted on bad terms. Tom, he hated him. But he's not a killer, Monsieur Poirot, he couldn't be. Poirot's expression remained inscrutable. We shall see, mademoiselle. The truth, it is like a diamond hard, but it sparkles when held to the light. As the day wore on, Poirot pieced together the timeline of Grayson's death. The poison, he determined, had been administered hours earlier, likely in the tea served after dinner. Lady Evelyn had poured the tea, but others had access to the tray before it reached Grayson. The chess piece, however, was a deliberate touch, a message from the killer. Poirot recalled the book on toxicology in Grayson's room, the page on cyanide bookmarked. Had Grayson suspected his own fate? Or had the killer placed the book there to taunt them further? By evening, Poirot had a theory, but it was not yet complete. The secret passage, the coded document, the chess piece all pointed to a mind that thrived on complexity, on misdirection. Dr. Thornton's expertise made her a likely candidate for the poison, but the passage suggested someone with intimate knowledge of the manor. Lady Evelyn, as the lady of the house, would know its secrets, but her grief seemed too raw, too real. And then there was Tom Reed, the mysterious fiancé, whose grudge against Sir Reginald could not be ignored. Poirot sat alone in the drawing room, the manor quiet save for the distant rumble of thunder. He closed his eyes, letting his mind wander through the maze of clues. The killer, he realized, was not just clever, they were arrogant. The note, the chess piece, the locked room all were designed to outwit him, to prove the killer's superiority. But Hercule Poirot was not so easily outfoxed. He opened his eyes, a spark of determination in them. The game, he said to himself, it is not over, but the next move, it belongs to Poirot. The chapter closed with the detective rising from his chair, his cane tapping lightly on the floor as he prepared to set his trap. The killer had made their move, but Poirot was ready to counter. The truth, he knew, was close, so close he could almost touch it. Chapter 9. The chessboard of motivist storm that had battered Ravenwood Manor through the night had subsided into a restless drizzle, leaving the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and the faint tang of ozone. The grand old house, with its creaking timbers and shadowed corridors, seemed to hold its breath as the investigation into Sir Reginald Ashford's murder deepened. The discovery of Harold Grayson's lifeless body in the library, his fingers curled around a black king chess piece, had cast a new pall over the gathering. For Hercule Poirot, the addition of a second murder was not a complication but a clarification, a piece of the puzzle that sharpened the edges of his suspicions. Poirot stood in the library, his small, precise figure framed by the towering bookshelves that lined the room. The fire in the hearth had long since died, leaving a chill that seemed to seep into the very bones of the manor. Inspector Japp, his face a mask of frustration, paced near the window, while Captain Hastings hovered near the door, his notebook clutched tightly as he scribbled observations. The local coroner, a dour man named Dr. Hargrove, knelt beside Grayson's body, his gloved hands probing with clinical detachment. No external wounds, Dr. Hargrove muttered, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. The rigidity suggests death occurred several hours ago, likely late last evening. I'll need to run tests, but the froth at the mouth and the dilated pupils point to poison. Poison, oui, Poirot said, his voice calm but laced with an undercurrent of intensity. He bent slightly, his eyes fixed on the black king in Grayson's hand. And this chess piece, it is no accident, Inspector. It is a message, a taunt. The killer wishes to play a game with Hercule Poirot. Japp stopped pacing and turned, his brow furrowed. A game? You think this is some kind of challenge? Poirot. First Sir Reginald, stabbed in a locked room, and now Grayson, poisoned with a chess piece in his hand. It's madness. Not madness, mon ami, Poirot corrected, straightening and tapping his temple. It is method. The killer is deliberate, precise. They wish us to believe the crimes are separate, but they are linked to moves on the same chessboard. We must understand the board before we can name the player. Hastings cleared his throat, his voice tentative. But Poirot, what does the chess piece mean? Is it a clue to the killer's identity, or just a way to throw us off? Poirot's mustache twitched slightly, a sign of amusement or perhaps exasperation. Hastings, you see the piece but not the pattern. The Black King is a symbol of power, of dominance. In chess, to capture the king is to end the game. But here, the king is already fallen. Grayson, a quiet scholar, holds it in death. Why? Because the killer wishes to tell us they are in control, that they dictate the moves. Yet, in doing so, they reveal their arrogance. And arrogance, my friend, is a flopperoken exploit. Jap snorted, crossing his arms. Fine words, Poirot, but we're no closer to catching this fiend. No fingerprints, no witnesses, and now to bodies. The guests are terrified, and I've got the press breathing down my neck. What's your next step? Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet determination. The next step, Inspector, is to reconstruct the timeline of last evening. The poison, it was not instantaneous, it took time. To act, we must know who had access to Monsieur Grayson, what he consumed, and who might have placed the chess piece in his hand. And we must consider the link to Sir Reginald. Both men were connected to this mysterious deal, the investments, the foreign company, the formula of Dr. Thornton. The chessboard is not only of motives, but of secrets. The library was sealed off, and Poirot led the way to the drawing room, where the remaining guests had been gathered under the watchful eye of a young constable. Lady Evelyn Ashford sat by the fire, her face pale, but composed, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Dr. Clara Thornton stood near the window, her sharp eyes darting between the rain-streaked glass and the group. Victor Langston lounged in an armchair, his usual charm dimmed by a nervous edge, while Beatrice Lyle sat on a sofa, her hands twisting a handkerchief as tears glistened in her eyes. Poirot surveyed them, his gaze lingering on each face as if reading the lines of a book. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, his voice soft but commanding attention. The tragedy of Monsieur Grayson's death adds urgency to our inquiry. I must ask you to recount your movements last evening, particularly between the hours of 6 and midnight. Be precise, if you please. Lady Evelyn spoke first, her voice steady despite her pallor. I was in the drawing-room after dinner, serving tea to the guests. Mr. Grayson was there, reading as usual. I offered him tea, which he took, and then I retired to my room around 9. I was overcome with grief over Reginald's death. I saw no one after that. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. And the tea, Lady Evelyn, it was prepared by whom? By me, she replied, her eyes meeting his without flinching. The servants were dismissed early, as I wished to keep things intimate. I used the tea from the kitchen stores, the same. We all drank. Merci, Poirot said, turning to Dr. Thornton. And you, mademoiselle? Your whereabouts? Dr. Thornton's lips tightened, her posture rigid. I was in my room, working on my notes. I didn't join the others for tea. I had no appetite after everything. I stayed alone until I heard the scream this morning. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. Alone, you say, yet a vial of a curious chemical was found in your bag. Might it have a connection to Monsieur Grayson's unfortunate end? A murmur ran through the room, and Dr. Thornton's face flushed. That vial is part of my research, a harmless compound for my experiments. I resent the implication. Mr. Poirot, resentment does not alter facts, Poirot said smoothly. We shall see what the laboratory says about this compound. Victor Langston leaned forward, his voice sharp. This is absurd. You're grasping at straws, Poirot. I was in the billiard room with Hastings until nearly 11, playing a few rounds. Then I went to bed. I didn't see Grayson after dinner. Hastings nodded, confirming. That's true, Poirot. Victor was with me. He's a terrible shot. By the way, a faint smile crossed Poirot's lips, but it vanished quickly. And you, Mademoiselle Lyle? Beatrice's voice trembled. I was in my room, too. I couldn't bear to be around everyone after Sir Reginald. I was reading, trying to distract myself. I didn't see Mr. Grayson after dinner either. Poirot's gaze lingered on her, noting the way her fingers shredded the handkerchief. Reading, you say, a commendable pastime, yet your eyes, Mademoiselle, they tell of sleepless worrying. Is there something you wish to share? Beatrice shook her head, her lips pressed tightly together. Poirot did not press further, but made a mental note of her agitation. As the interviews concluded, Poirot retreated to the study, where the locked room mystery of Sir Reginald's death still gnawed at him. The cryptic note outfoxed at last, and the chess piece were twin riddles, each pointing to a mine that delighted in complexity. He paced the room, his hands clasped behind his back, his mind sifting through the details like a jeweler, examining facets of a gem. Hastings, he said suddenly, consider the tea. Lady Evelyn prepared it, served it, and all partook except Dr. Thornton, who claimed she was absent. Yet Grayson died of poison, and the poison, it was not instantaneous. It was administered earlier, perhaps in the tea, perhaps in something else he consumed. We must know his habits, his movements. Hastings frowned, flipping through his notebook. Grayson was always in the library. Poirot. He barely ate at dinner, just picked at his food. But he did take tea. Lady Evelyn handed him a cup herself. Do you think she? Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. Do not leap to conclusions, mon ami. The truth, it is like a delicate soufflé, it requires patience to rise. We must also consider the chess piece. Why a black king? Why not a pawn, a knight, a queen? The choice is deliberate. Grayson, a scholar, a man of knowledge, perhaps he knew too much, and the killer wished to mark him as a fallen king. Jap entered the study, his face grim. The coroner's preliminary report is in. The poison was a fast-acting alkaloid, likely from a plant source. Grayson would have felt the effects within an hour or two, but he might have lingered, semi-conscious, for a bit. No way to know exactly when it was administered without more tests. Poirot's eyes brightened. An alkaloid, you say? This is most interesting. Monsieur Grayson's book on toxicology, did it contain references to such poisons? Jap nodded. I had a constable flip through it. There's a whole chapter on plant-based alkaloids, with notes in the margins. Grayson was studying it. All right, then we must assume he suspected something, Poirot said. Perhaps he was not the intended victim but a witness to something dangerous. Or perhaps he was silenced before he could speak. The day wore on, and Poirot continued his inquiries, moving through the manor with the quiet intensity of a predator stalking prey. He examined the tea service in the kitchen, noting the unremarkable blend of leaves in the tin. He questioned the servants, who confirmed Lady Evelyn's account of dismissing them early. He inspected Grayson's room, finding the toxicology book with its dog-eared pages and a faint smudge of ink on the bookmark, a detail that intrigued him but yielded no immediate answers. As evening fell, Poirot gathered the guests again, this time in the dining room, where the long mahogany table gleamed under the chandelier's light. The atmosphere was tense, each guest eyeing the others with suspicion. Poirot stood at the head of the table, his small stature commanding the room as effectively as any general. Mes amis, he began, we are at a crossroads. 2 men are dead, and the killer walks among us. The chess piece, the locked room, the poison, these are not random acts but part of a design. I ask you now to consider. What did Sir Reginald and Monsieur Grayson share? A secret, perhaps, a deal that threatened someone in this room. Victor scoffed, his voice cutting through the silence. You're fishing, Poirot. Grayson was a nobody, a bookworm. Why kill him? Poirot's eyes locked onto Victor's. A nobody, you say. Yet he held a black king, a symbol of power. And you, Monsieur Langston, you who borrowed so much from Sir Reginald, did you not also have dealings with Monsieur Grayson? Perhaps a conversation, a shared confidence. Victor's face reddened. I barely spoke to the man. You're trying to pin this on me because of some ledger page. It's nonsense. Perhaps, Poirot said, his tone mild but his eyes sharp. But the ledger, it tells a story of debts unpaid, of promises broken. And debts, they can drive men and women to desperate acts. Lady Evelyn's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her glass of water. Mr. Poirot, This is unbearable. My husband is dead, and now poor Harold. Surely you don't suspect us all." Poirot turned to her, his expression softening but not relenting. "Lady Evelyn, grief is a heavy burden, but truth is heavier still. You served the tea, you knew your husband's plans, and you, perhaps, knew more of Monsieur Grayson's studies than you have admitted. Tell me, did you ever discuss his work on poisons?" Her eyes widened, but she recovered quickly. We spoke occasionally. He was a scholar, always buried in his books. I found his interest fascinating. Nothing more." Poirot nodded, filing away her response. He turned to Dr. Thornton, who had remained silent, her arms crossed. "And you, mademoiselle, your formula, was it discussed with Monsieur Grayson? Did he know of its value, its danger?" Dr. Thornton's jaw tightened. "I told you, my work is confidential." Grayson was curious. "Yes, but I never shared details. If he was poisoned, it has nothing to do with me." Poirot's mustache curved slightly, a sign of his mind at work. "We shall see, mademoiselle, we shall see." As the gathering dispersed, Poirot lingered in the dining room, his eyes tracing the intricate patterns of the chandelier. Hastings approached, his face a mixture of awe and confusion. "Poirot, you're stirring them up, but I don't see how it helps. Everyone's got an alibi, and the poison could have come from anywhere. Are you any closer to solving this?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Closer, Hastings, always closer. The chessboard is becoming clear. The killer believes they have outmaneuvered us, but they have made a mistake. The Black King, the poison, the locked room, they are not merely clues, but pieces of a personality. The killer is proud, meticulous, but not infallible. And when they make their next move, Poirot will be ready." The night deepened, and the manor settled into an uneasy silence. Poirot retired to his room, but sleep eluded him. He sat at a small desk, his notebook open, sketching a diagram of the guests, their motives, and their connections. The Black King lay at the center, a dark star around which the puzzle revolved. He murmured to himself, "The game is not yet won, but the board is set." And Hercule Poirot, he does not lose at chess. The rain had stopped, and a sliver of moonlight pierced the clouds, casting long shadows across Ravenwood Manor. Somewhere, in the house, the killer watched, waited, and planned their next move. But Poirot's little gray cells were tireless, and the truth, he knew, was only a matter of time. The investigation continued the next morning with renewed vigor. Poirot began by revisiting the library, where Grayson's body had been removed, but the scene remained untouched. He examined the chessboard on a side table, noting that only the Black King was missing from the set. The other pieces stood in orderly ranks, untouched, as if the game had never begun. This, too, was a clue, a game that was not a game, a challenge. Issued in death, he summoned the gardener, Tom Reed, who had been mentioned in passing by Beatrice. Tom was a wiry man in his 30s, with callous hands and a guarded expression. Poirot questioned him about his movements, learning that he had been tending the grounds late into the evening. "Despite the storm, I was fixing the shed roof," Tom said, his voice gruff. "Didn't see nobody, didn't hear nothing. And yet," Poirot said, "there is a footprint in the garden, near the study window. A footprint that matches shoes from your shed. Can you explain this, monsieur?" Rita Tom's eyes flickered with unease. I was checking the windows during the storm. Sir Reginald asked me to make sure everything was secure. That's all." Poirot nodded, dismissing him but noting the hesitation. The footprint was a loose thread, one he intended to pull. He next sought out Beatrice, finding her in the conservatory, surrounded by wilting ferns and the faint scent of damp earth. She looked up, startled, as he approached. "Mademoiselle Lyle," Poirot said gently, "you have been most distressed. I understand your grief, but I must ask your fiancé, Tom Reed. He is known to you, oui, and perhaps to Sir Reginald in ways that caused." Tension in Beatrice's face crumpled, and she nodded. Tom worked for Sir Reginald years ago. They had a falling out. Tom was dismissed for something he didn't do. Sir Reginald accused him of theft, but it was a misunderstanding. When I told Sir Reginald about our engagement, he was furious. He said Tom was no good, that he'd cut me out of the will if I married him. Poirot's eyes softened, but his mind was razor sharp. And did Tom know of this threat? She hesitated, then nodded. I told him. He was angry, but he'd never kill anyone. He's not like that. Perhaps not, Poirot said, his tone neutral. But anger, it can make pawns of us all. The day unfolded with more interviews, more clues, and more questions. Poirot examined the secret passage again, noting its dusty floor and the faint scuff marks that suggested recent use. He tested the bookshelf mechanism, finding it well-oiled and silent, a perfect tool for a murderer. He also requested the coroner's full report, which confirmed the alkaloid was derived from a rare plant, one mentioned in Grayson's toxicology book. The book's marginal notes, written in Grayson's precise hand, included a reference to a delivery system, a term that intrigued Poirot. By late afternoon, he gathered the guests once more, this time in the study. The room felt oppressive, its heavy curtains blocking the weak sunlight. Poirot stood before the fireplace, where the torn ledger page had been found, and addressed the group. Mesdames et messieurs, he said, we are close to the truth, but it is obscured by lies. The poison that killed Monsieur Grayson was no accident. It was chosen with care, administered with precision. The chess piece, it is a signature, a boast. In the locked room of Sir Reginald's death, it is not so impossible as it seems. I have found a passage, a secret way, that explains the mystery. But the question remains, who used it, and why? Lady Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her chest. A passage, in this house, how could we not know? Poirot's eyes flicked to her. Some secrets, Lady Evelyn, are kept even from those closest to them. But secrets, they have a way of revealing themselves. Tell me, did you ever walk the gardens at night? Did you ever notice the shed? The shoes? The footprints? Her face paled, but she shook her head. I rarely go to the gardens. The gardener handles all that. Poirot nodded, turning to Dr. Thornton. And you, mademoiselle, your formula did it ever involve such a poison, a plant-based alkaloid? Perhaps. Dr. Thornton's eyes flashed with defiance. My work is for industry, not murder. You're barking up the wrong tree, Poirot. Perhaps, he said, but the tree, it has many branches. As the day drew to a close, Poirot felt the pieces of the puzzle shifting into place. The chessboard of motives was complex, but patterns were emerging. Lady Evelyn's composure, Dr. Thornton's evasiveness, Victor's debts, Beatrice's secrets, Tom's grudge, each was a move in the game. And the Black King, it was the key. Poirot knew the killer was watching, waiting for him to falter. But Hercule Poirot did not falter. He retired to his room, his mind buzzing with possibilities. The chessboard was not just a metaphor but a map, and he was closing in on the king. The next move, he knew, would be decisive.